Hello. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Both of those are relatively important, I would say. Also, look, I'm not green. I did it. I fixed it. I have purified myself of Nurgle's infection, and I am now once again vaguely human shaped. I am put the green back now. I don't know how I did it in the first place, but it has been fixed. So, hello, welcome to the stream, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I do apologize for the very sudden schedule change. There was a family emergency little thing that came up, so Andy needs to take care of that, which is good because family comes first. And so you're stuck with just me this time, which I know that you're all super thrilled about. I know that's what you actually want. So everything's okay. It's just a matter of the laws are dealing with their thing as they should. So it's just going to be us hanging out this time. So because of that, we're going to be doing a Ask Sotek Anything stream, which, to be fair, we have not done one of these in a hot minute. And as such, there is a lot that y'all can ask about. So we'll kind of do the usual thing of anyone that does like super chats or bits and stuff. Those will be kind of our first priorities. And then we will... oh, I sound echoey. Hold on.
Haha, how about now? Do I sound better? Sorry, it was on the wrong microphone. I'm in a new setup, so excuse me. So everything might be a little funky, but so much better. Okay, good. Apologies, I was on the wrong microphone. So anyway, yeah, we're here to chat and do all that stuff. Anything with like super chats and bits, of course, we'll do as a priority, and then we'll just kind of grab out comments as we see them. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. So Ranger of Shadows, thank you very much. Hey, Sotek, since Cathay has gotten announced for the old world, I was wondering what you thought the armies of infamy might be. That's a good question. So the big trick behind armies of infamy is, generally speaking, that they use minis that are already available or can be kit bashed without like people breaking their brains trying to figure it out. So what I would say is that I would probably say that the army of Nangao is going to be one of them. So like the grand defenders of Nangao or something like that, where it's going to be an army that's very, very gunpowder focused. As Nangao is the city of rings that is kind of part of the Great Bastion and really makes up its western edge. So I suspect that'll probably be one of the really big like main ones. Is the Nangao focus, and then for the second one, so one of the things that's been kind of like talked about a little bit that we don't know for sure yet is that when they released the Warhammer community article on Grand Cathay, they kind of talked about how Miao Ying is like gonna be coming to the old world. Like she's gonna be leading the people of Grand Cathay over to the old world for some reason. which to me doesn't really make a lot of sense. It kind of almost feels like GW, if they end up doing that, to me it kind of feels like they're just shoehorning Miao Ying over there to try and like, I don't know. But if they end up doing that, then I would expect there to be an expeditionary army of infamy that maybe allows you to take units from other factions more easily without them necessarily being like just straight up allies. So maybe seeing like some like ogre mercenary units, maybe allow you to take some more like Empire or Bretonia stuff or any number of things. So that would be my guess for the two armies of infamy based on what we know we're gonna get. Obviously there's a chance that we might get, if they wanted to be really cool, it might be really fun to get something like an army that's really focused around the Terracotta Sentinels, or the what are they called now? Are they just Cathayan Sentinels? Or I forget what, because they're not Terracotta Sentinels anymore, because now they can be made of other materials. Where the Terracotta ones are just the ones on the Great Bastion. Cathayan Sentinels, yeah. So I could see a Cathayan Sentinel focused army that allows you to take like way more of them. That would be pretty hype. But yeah, should be cool. Then we've got Christopher. Thank you very much for the 15 months of membership, by the way. What do you want the next Warhammer 3 New Racer faction to be? So, for me personally, I would really like to get the old world finished. And what I mean by that is I would really like to get like the Dogs of War. And in a perfect world, for me personally, the Dogs of War would be like Estalia and Talea kind of together. And then one day in the future, they would release like mini DLCs of factions where it's like a single legendary lord and a decent sized army, but it's not quite as big and varied as the other traditional factions. And that's how we would get like Araby. But for the Dogs of War, I would also be more than willing to accept getting like one Talayan legendary lord, one Estalian legendary, or maybe like two Talayan legendary lords, one Estalian and one Arabian. You know, if I could get like Borgio the Besieger, Lucrezia Belladonna, the Golden Magus as the Arabian or Arabian, however you want to pronounce it, from Dreadfleet, and then for Estalia, they'd have to make up a new character because we don't really have any dedicated Estalian characters. So either one of those, I think, would be very, very, very nice. Because that would allow the old world to feel finished. Anything else I think could be explored through other systems like mercenaries, and stuff like that. But that would be my personal hope. That being said, if you wanted to do something outside of the old world, then End would be my next choice. I think End would be the most critical for allowing that connecting space between Grand Cathay and the rest of the Warhammer world in Total War to feel more like connected. Because currently it's like that southern approach through End is just that little pass over the mountains. So to me, End would be the next logical step for fleshing out the maps and stuff. Quinn, what are priests of Myrmidia called? Brother, etc. I am relatively sure they go through the brother and sister system. And like, mother and father and stuff like that. It's pretty rare that there would be a difference from that, but that would be a good thing to check, probably from the Tome of Salvation. From Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, or maybe from the new Up in Arms book, which explores a lot of Talea, Myrmidia, and stuff. So you might try those and see if there is specific info there, but I am relatively sure that they still use the brother and sister system unless you're dealing with a father or a mother, which would be like, more of a full priest as opposed to more like an initiate. So yeah. Let's see. From there, we've got Laughing God. What are some things you'd like to see for this edition of Wolfrip? What are some things Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay being what that is? What are some things you'd like to see in the future editions, mechanic or fluff wise? So that's tough. The big thing that I want to see for Wolfrip mainly is I would like a new adventure series. So currently they have told, like, they did the Enemy Within, which overall was fine. I wish they had made some different choices with kind of making it a little better about going from like the Enemy Within all the way into Empire Ruins. There are some weird bumps because it feels like they didn't do as good of a job as I would have liked of kind of like updating what's going on around the rest of the Empire. And there's a lot of story threads that kind of don't make a lot of sense or get dropped weirdly. So as a GM, you kind of have to massage certain elements of the series, but overall it's fine for the Enemy Within. So I would really like C7 to try and do a new series, like a new 3-part adventure maybe, that uses a lot of their new books to tell it. So like, we've got like the upcoming Kalazankor book, we've got the Kathik book coming up, which I don't know why they're doing a Kathik book and not an Ulthuan book. I'm not sure what the decision making behind that is, but regardless, like, we're getting like some high elf focused stuff, we're getting some dwarf focused stuff. Obviously, we've got Lustria, so I would love for them to do an adventure that takes advantage of the new books they're making. I think ideally, if they could do like an adventure series that maybe starts in Ulthuan, then goes to Nagaroth, then goes to Lustria, that could be really fun. Or maybe like from Lustria to Nagaroth to Ulthuan, or from Ulthuan to Lustria to Nagaroth, like however they want to do it. I think a new large adventure that takes your party around the world and is completely like, I would like it as a higher tier adventure. But I think it would be fine to kind of have it where you could do it, whenever you want. But as far as like mechanics and stuff or fluff wise, the biggest thing I want fluff wise is just more area books. Like, I would really like a new Bretonia book and a new Kislev book, because they have both changed pretty dramatically from their second edition iterations, where Bretonia in Warhammer Fantasy is now quite different thanks to all the changes in the old world. But granted, I mean, they could use an old world book to do that, so but the biggest thing I want is a Grand Cathay book. Like, if I could pick one thing right now and they were like, you get one thing and that's it, I would want a big fat Grand Cathay book. Probably I would want like an adventure in Grand Cathay that's at least a 3-part adventure, but preferably a 5-part adventure. Then I'd want a big, here's Cathay, like 260 something pages book. And then I'd also like to have a player's guide. Though, if anyone from C7 is watching, please someone edit how y'all do player guides, because like, I don't know about y'all, but I find the player guide books to be a little weird because they're supposed to be player guides, but they're not really, because they still have like adventure hooks and they have a lot of like GM information when they're supposed to be books for players. Like, I don't know. I feel like those books should mostly be like, here's how you create a character. Here are the things going on in the places you might be from, to like inform what your character's background might be. And then here's like a shitload of careers. And the high elf and the dwarf one don't do that. They're more like GM guides that also have some player relevant information, which I find a little weird. But Anyway, any of those would be great. Any of those would be very cool. Mechanics wise, I don't think there's anything I would super need for mechanics. I mean, they've explored a lot of really, really good stuff. The only thing that I would probably, the only thing I might encourage mechanic wise from Cubicle 7 is I think it would be really worth them releasing a specialized book that is specifically about making high tier NPCs, high tier enemies, high tier allies, high tier, all that stuff, like really delving into how like some of the big bads of the setting, some of the big heroes of the setting, and really exploring like, okay, how do you take a party that has like 20,000 experience and still make the Warhammer world feel really dangerous? And like, how do you make it where players are not just steamrolling everything? Because that's one of the big criticisms that I have of Cubicle 7 books right now, is that all of their stat lines feel like they're designed for a beginner party. So like if you go look at the Illustria book, despite the fact the Illustria book in many ways feels like it's meant for a party that's already done a significant amount of adventuring, because they did a good job with some of the dangers, like the dangers of the jungle, the diseases, and all that stuff. Like a lot of those feel pretty threatening, and very difficult for a small, like a party of like 4 to 5 people, to deal with. But I would really, really love. But what I was gonna say is, if you look at like some of the stat lines for the bosses in that game, like Lord Skrulk and Lokir Fellheart, they're not that great. It's like I'd really love to see them explore like, okay, here's how you take an enemy who has like he's got like what feels like 50,000 experience. Like he's got all these different, like he's got like 5+ levels in various talents. He's got well over 100 points in the various characteristics. He's got well over like 30 to 50 points in relevant skills. Like this is a really scary character, and this is how you like play with them. This is how you use them. This is how you do, like, how do you deal with a really scary character versus a PC? How do you handle rolling with these like really, really high various levels of bonuses? Because there are ways to do that. But Cubicle 7 doesn't really have a lot of support for that at the moment. Hammond, questions, your thoughts on your DM Discord. What is this? Cleanse the world of Skaven. Sotek didn't listen, he just opened a winery. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's pretty decent. The Saurus designs are very weird in this little comic. These are like old edition Lizardmen. That's funny though. Biofoot. Okay, let's argue that you're playing a resource management game. You find an exploit that allows you to double an item stack. Do you take advantage of the exploit? Me personally, generally, no. I don't like to use exploits. So a good example is that I loved playing Warcraft 3 growing up, and Warcraft 3 had a bunch of really easy exploits that you could take advantage of. Cheat codes, quite literally, where you would just type in like greed is good to get 1 billion of whatever resource you needed, or there is no spoon for infinite mana and all that stuff. I personally prefer not to exploit the games that I play. I like to try and play them the way that's intended, because I tend to find that for me personally is a more fulfilling experience. Now that's not always the case. Like there will be times where like maybe I'm looking for something specific, or I'm trying to get to a particular part of the game, in which case if there is a relevant fast forward button, I might apply it. But like take like Total War Warhammer, for example, right? There's a whole community built around the fact that you can exploit the AI. A lot of what Legend of Total War does is exploiting the AI, which allows him to pull off like some insane victories. But I personally don't find that very enjoyable when I'm playing the game myself, though it is fun to watch. Charles, are there lore elements, units, or whatever you'd like to see ported back from Age of Sigmar to Fantasy? There are, yeah. I think pretty much anything that I could justify, I'm happy to port backwards. So, for instance, any of the new Demons of Chaos that are not like explicitly created in Warhammer Fantasy, I would be more than happy to backport. So, like any of the new units or heroes from the Demons, I bring them back with minor exceptions. So, like Salaxi Hellbane, like a Greater Demon of Slaanesh, that's all about martial perfection and like hunting other greater demons. Sure, awesome. I can't remember his name, but the very first Plague Bearer guy, the Nurgle demon that tends the gardens of Nurgle and he rides on the snail monster. Sure, great. But like the twins, Sinessa and Dexessa, I would not bring them back because they are very explicitly created in Age of Sigmar, and their storyline purely revolves around Age of Sigmar, where bringing them back would be much more weird, and would be like, oh, they were, Horticulus Slimex. Yeah. So where I could justify it without stretching things too far, it'd be fine. Like the expanded undead roster, as far as like, oh, there's these new types of horrid monsters. There's, all the new ghosts for the Night Haunt. Like, I wouldn't bring back special characters, so I wouldn't bring back Lady Alinder or Kurdos Valentian or any of the special characters, but I would bring back all of the units. So like the new Black Coach, who I would just replace the old Black Coach with. And like all the different kinds of Night Haunt, I think are fine. They're just people that died in very specific ways, and their souls aren't able to find rest, so they're flying around being a pain in the ass. Instead of just in Warhammer Fantasy, where we have like Spirit Host, Karen Wraith, and Banshee, we can have like a much more diverse range of undead spirits. So in most cases, for factions that already existed in Warhammer Fantasy, the answer would be yes, as long as it's not a special character or it's not tied directly into like a particular form of technology or system that doesn't exist in Warhammer Fantasy. The army that I would probably have the most trouble with, funny enough, would be the Sylvaneth, because the Sylvaneth would be a very interesting case of, from like a total war perspective, I would not backport the vast majority of Sylvaneth stuff. But from like a lore perspective, if someone came to me and was like, well, instead of having dryads, what if we had and just dryads and tree men and that's it, and tree kin, what if we were to expand it a little bit? And I would say, okay, there's a discussion we could have here of like, there are certain elements of the Sylvaneth that you could backport and it would require minimal massaging. However, there are certain units that I would probably avoid because they kind of more heavily disrupt the dynamic that exists between the Wood Elves and the Tree Spirits. So, like, I probably would not bring back the Kurnoth Hunters that have the treekin guys that have the big bows, because that really should be the Wood Elf. The Tree Spirits really shouldn't be using ranged weapons in fantasy. So I would probably be like, okay, that's going to be a no. But like, oh, these guys are kind of like, they look like a tree spirit, but with like an elf flowing out of the top of it. And you could say, well, what if this was kind of like an interpretation of the treekin, where like an elf's spirit remains more intact than normal treekin, and so they are able to have this kind of pseudo elven visage to them. And I would say, okay, that's interesting. Like, I think there's something we could do with that. So it would just, for me, it would be a case by case basis, and I would want to like go through all of them and say, can I make this work in Warhammer Fantasy in a convincing way where if someone were to see it, they would go, oh, of course. And their first thought shouldn't be, oh, is that an Age of Sigmar unit? Their first thought should just be, oh, look, Warhammer Fantasy. So yeah, that it would just depend. Bartkey, hi Sotek, where on the power scale is Tyrion? He has no magic but seems geared up and strong as hell. So this is one of those things where my opinion differs rather heavily from Andy Law's, where I consider Tyrion to be one of the strongest fighters in the setting. Because I think that one of the things that Warhammer leans on, especially in later editions like 6th and 7th edition, that I value is that you deal with a lot of prodigy characters. So characters that in the grand scheme of things are not very old. Tyrion and Teclis are, compared to the likes of Malekith and Marathi, they're babies, right? Like they're not even 1,000 years old. They're not even 500 years old. They're incredibly young. However, they're prodigies. They're just full on prodigies, and they are individuals that sort of represent that the end times is coming, like the big one, the big final battle to determine the fate of everyone. And it's almost like in some way that they are an immune system response of the Warhammer Fantasy world, producing these like exceptional individuals that, because generally speaking, when you're dealing with Warhammer Fantasy, a rule that is most of the time very valid is that age equals power. So the older you are, the more powerful you are, generally speaking. And that tends to be true for almost all races. So it's like elves, oldest or baddest. Dwarfs, until you get past like a certain point, like Crag the Grim is kind of implied to be past his prime. Though even that's a bit nebulous because like he had playable stats in older editions and he was fucking insane. But then they kind of retired him. So you could argue that it's because like he finally kind of reached a point where he was sort of retired. But generally speaking, your elves, dwarves, even humans, the older you are, the scarier you are. But there are characters that fly in the face of that, where we have a lot of relatively young characters who are terrifying. And it's something that I see a lot in the setting, which is why I stand by it. And I'm fine with saying that Tyrion is one of the scariest characters in the setting. Now, granted, his items carry a lot of that weight. Tyrion is quite literally wielding the items of an Aryan. He's wielding an Aryan sword, Sunfang. He's wearing an Aryan's armor. And on top of that, he has the Heart of Avalorn, though the Heart of Avalorn is very, very powerful, but also comes with kind of a spooky downside if he biffs it. But Tyrion is very heavily, constantly stated to be like, oh, he's like one of the greatest warriors. When you read like stories that involve him, he's like incredibly skilled at what he does. He's able to survive fighting the likes of Nakari with no magic. Like he's just going pure melee, and he's not winning against Nakari, but he's holding him off. Even for a brief moment, that's still obscenely impressive. And the big thing is that like one of my a book series I really, really like that I think does a good job of representing the various elf characters in an interesting way is called the Sons of Illyrian. And the Sons of Illyrian is a two-part series that focuses on a pair of elf brothers who were dealing with shenanigans. And there is a dark elf invasion of Ulthuan, and it's a super, 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 super good book. Actually, I just realized that I'm not actually listening to anything, so I can just do this stream without my headphones on. I don't have to listen to someone. I'm not listening for someone else to be chatting. So there is the whole element of that in the book. They do a really good job of, in my opinion, showcasing the various strengths of the other characters. And showing like, why is Tyrion very scary? Why is Teclis very impressive? Why is Emmerich really scary? And it's an interesting, good read. I very much would say that like I consider Tyrion like an S-class character. Now, I do think there are characters that could beat Tyrion or could threaten Tyrion. Like one of the ones that we talked about, I think on the last time we did a Lorebeard thing, which was this past Sunday. This past Sunday, that's right. I would very much say that like Abarash, I think is a character that could beat Tyrion. Because Abarash is like everything that Tyrion is, but he has exceptional age and skill on top of it, and he's like the absolute pinnacle of what it is to be a martial vampire. But that being said, I think Tyrion is, absolutely incredible. And very much unlike Andy, I put no stock in tabletop stats. I don't think tabletop stats should ever in any case, in any circumstance, I don't think they should ever be used as a metric to evaluate a character's abilities, because they're so wildly inconsistent. Like I never think they should be used because they're so not nonsensical a lot of the time, and I find them to be very silly. So I don't like to put stock on them because I don't think they're useful. I prefer just kind of reading about the characters, because you kind of have an issue where it's like their points, their stats are based on their points, and all of that is encapsulated within like what role they're supposed to fulfill within an army, and a bunch of just other silly stuff. So yeah. Yeah. Quinn, if by some freak miracle a human was capable of using Quaish, which is the lore of high magic, how would the Empire treat it? It's a great battlefield boon, but isn't one of the 8 sanctioned wins and requires mastering multi-wins. So if you met a human that was able to wield high magic, you are dealing with a freak, to be very, very blunt. Like, you're dealing with an absolute freak. This is not a normal human being. This is someone who is either not human and is pretending to be, or they are they are incredibly ancient, like many hundreds of years old, to have had time to master all of the different winds of magic. It would be an incredibly powerful character. Because like even Volans, the original Supreme Patriarch, in most stories that I have read, Volans was not capable of wielding high magic, but he was able to like understand it, and he was able to see it, and he was able to it's kind of implied that he probably would have been able to use it if not for like everything that goes down with the colleges. And Volans was a freak, but he was also from an age where that wasn't, necessarily super illegal. Just being a wizard in general was super illegal. I think if the modern empire met a human that was capable of wielding high magic, anybody with a brain would probably think that guy needs to be killed, or just because it's not possible for this guy to exist. Now, granted, there are exceptions, but I think most characters would very reasonably come to the idea that, okay, if this guy is legit, like this guy's actually wielding high magic, then he's not what he says he is. Like, either he's not human and he's pretending to be human, or he's fallen. Like, he's fallen to chaos, and the dark gods have gifted him with mastery over magic. And because like wielding high magic does not mean you're a good person. This is something Warhammer Fantasy kind of fucks up because of the tabletop game, which is annoying, which is that high magic should be wielded by many different races. Like, it would not, I don't think it would be that bizarre to come across, like, dark elves know how to use high magic. Now, they prefer to use dark magic because it's more destructive. But like, there would be chaos sorcerers who would be capable of wielding high magic, in my opinion. So I don't think just because you wield high magic does not mean you're a good guy. First. Second of all, a human wielding high magic means either that human has incredibly supernatural ability, even by Warhammer Fantasy standards, or they are many centuries old, or they are not human at all and they're just pretending to be human. So in any of those cases, I don't think the Empire would see them as a good thing. I think most people in universe would see them as either a threat or just an outright bad thing, because what they represent is like a direct threat to everything that the colleges are. So there would probably be like a whole thing, but I don't think they would be friendly. Darius Rose, in terms of the two Cyclopean giants at the bottom of Hell Pit, what do you think they are? I think perhaps they are the last two true Sky Titans. I don't know how Skaven captured them though. Lobotomy? Who knows? Would be the easiest answer. I think when you're using the term Cyclopean giants, that leans very heavily into like your Cthulhu type stuff, where Cyclopean is often a term used to describe like large unfathomable horrors. And I think with these creatures it would be best if it's never just like I think their origin is best left a mystery, especially because they're at the deepest parts of the pit. Now that being said, you could absolutely, if you wanted to detail what they are, describe them as like being the last known Sky Titans. Yeah, that'd be super sick. Maybe two of the Sky Titans that fled to the World's Edge Mountains up in the north, and then they encountered the Skaven and were captured. That would be super cool. You could also go with the story, if you wanted to go, I think, with a really interesting spooky story, you could say that the Skaven found them down there. So like Hell Pit, which is constantly digging further down to make more space. The 9 rings are constantly expanding downwards. I think there could be a really interesting story in the Skaven expanding further and further down until they come across they break into a chamber and these things are already there. Because we know in the Warhammer world that the depths of the earth is like a completely crazy fucking thing. Like there are absurd, impossible things to be found in the depths. Things that have been slumbering for eons and should not be woken up under any circumstances. There are ancient dragons, there are demons, or things that are so horrible and unknowable that demon is the only way to appropriately describe them. But we know from things like the geomantic web that the planet, the Fated Place, or Malice, the planet itself, seems to naturally produce its own type of magic, which is what the geomantic web basically collects and builds up, is a reservoir of. That there is a natural flow of magic in the planet itself. So it could be that maybe they are demons from like primordial times that were able to manifest, but they're not demons as we understand them, in that they're not from like the Big Four. They're before the Big Four. With the whole like excluding the whole timey-wimey weird bullshit of chaos. But so there are a lot of different things they could be. But you could also go with the idea that like maybe they're amalgamates. That would be kind of a horrifying story, where like the Skaven were just constantly dumping the absolute worst creatures they could create down there, and maybe 2 of them are actually like these horrible, like they dumped 2 things down there that were capable of absorbing other things, other life forms, and into themselves, and they became larger horrible things. So there are options you can play around with. Old Witch Doctor, when we get Egrimm van Horstmann, what spells do you think he will have? Lore of Light, Tzeentch, a mix? What would you want his campaign to include / look like? So I would say I would expect Egrimm van Horstmann to have a mix of the Lore of Tzeentch and the Lore of Light. That would be the most realistic thing, and would probably be totally fine. Where he's got Tzeentch magic, but he's also got like Net of a Mentok and maybe Banishment and one other spell of interest. And that seems very likely, in my opinion. As far as what his campaign mechanics would look like, the big thing for me that I want with Egrimm van Horstmann is that you want a character who is all about the cult mechanic. So he should be the character that is all about utilizing the Tzeentch cults to their full potential. So what I would probably do is have it where he gets like bonuses based on the amount of cults that he has. So like for every cult, I would do something like for every active cult Egrimm has on the map, he gets like +1 or +2 winds of magic reserved to each army. So like as he gets more and more and more cults, all of his different armies have like just horrifying amounts of magic. And maybe even something like he has unique cult buildings that he's able to build in his cults, or they have additional effects. And like one of them could be that maybe he gets like 1% spell intensity for each of them, or 1% spell mastery. So Egrimm's able to stack cults. And because I think the thing that you'd want to encourage with Egrimm is that while he's conquering the map in a traditional way, you also want him conquering the map using the cults, because that's his whole thing, right? Is the purple hand. The purple hand was made by Egrimm van Horstmann. He is its ultimate master. And the purple hand is the biggest, most important cult in the entirety of Warhammer Fantasy in the modern setting. Because obviously they're the big bads behind the enemy within. So I would very much lean into Egrimm being a character that is able to take cults to their conclusion. And then beyond that, you'd want him to have a lot of really powerful mortal buffs. So I would also have it where Egrimm gives substantial buffs to Chaos Sorcerers within his faction. So Chaos Sorcerer Lords of Tzeentch and Chaos Sorcerers of Tzeentch get all sorts of fun, crazy gimmicks and buffs and things. And, maybe give him a unique landmark and Altdorf for corrupting the college's magic, which is like one of his big goals. And then I would probably have him have some kind of fun idea around manipulating or taking advantage of somehow the different human factions in the world and their forms of magic. So maybe something that could be fun is like Egrimm having abilities where he can corrupt one of the human nations by capturing a relevant settlement and like building a landmark building that shows that he's like effectively corrupted them, and maybe that gives his army or his faction access to unique gimmicks based on the magic of those lands. So like if he takes over the empire, he can get some crazy buffs relating to the various battle lores by taking the college's magic. If he takes over Bretonia and like he takes over Castle Carcassonne, where the Fey Enchantress starts at, maybe by taking over that, he can build a unique landmark about like taking the magic of the damsels, and it gives him various kinds of buffs. Same thing for Kislev, where if he takes over Kislev itself, he's able to build a building related to the Ice Witches and the Hags, where he's able to get some kind of crazy cool buff. And over in Grand Cathay, if he takes Wei Jin, the capital, and he builds a unique landmark there, he gets some kind of crazy stuff. But for Egrimm, that would be the big thing is that, and you really want buffs for the Chaos Sorcerers and the Cultists. Yeah, the Cultist hero as well. Quinn, can ghosts possess someone in fantasy? Yes, it is rare. It is quite rare. But it could happen. Etheric entities are capable of possessing a living person. Whether it's a demon or a ghost. But ghost doing it is quite rare, but it is possible. Depending on the type of ghost, because there's a lot of different kinds of ghosts. You have like your poltergeists, your ghosts, you have your there's like 2 or 3 others at minimum. But there's an obscene number of ghosts. And you could absolutely have circumstances where one of them is that's like its thing that it's good at is possessing living people, which would be pretty spooky. World 777, thank you. Aren't Seraphon supposed to be way more advanced? I mean, all those spaceships, etc., and they still use spears when they fight in combat. Well, so yeah, you're correct. The Seraphon in Age of Sigmar are, by all measurements, far more advanced and scary than the Lizardmen. The Seraphon are like way more powerful than the Lizardmen ever were, but the games. So this is kind of one of those meta things where Games Workshop wants to still use all the fantasy models, and even when they've updated the Lizardmen range, they've kept them consistent with the ranges that already existed. And all they did is they went into the setting and they changed what their weapons and materials are made out of. So instead of the Lizardmen material weapons being like, oh, it's a spear made out of obstinite, which is what it was in Warhammer Fantasy, which is like a unique form of obsidian type stone. That's, way more reliable than actual obsidian, because actual obsidian shatters and breaks really easily. So instead of that, they were like, oh, it's actually made out of like this really powerful Azir infused material, that when you hit someone with it, it like causes explosions of Azirite magic and will like, tear through yada yada yada. So that they basically just took the whole shindig of the Seraphon and just use the same minis, but just upgraded what the materials were to make them scarier, which is what they did for a lot of the factions. So that being said, it also means that you could still backport the Seraphon stuff effortlessly. Like everything that's in the Seraphon armor could be backported. I think the only thing the Seraphon have gotten where it comes off as like it's a little silly looking in a Lizardman army is the new Salamander, which is the spawn of Sotek, because it's got like the old one device implanted in its head, which is a little future techy looking. But even that for the Lizardmen wouldn't be that weird. You'd just be like, oh look, it's it's old one tech. Okay, like problem solved. It's not that big of a change. And even then, you could very easily just like tell people like, oh, if you don't want to use it, just cut that little part off with like your clippers and you're done. Like that's the only mini I can think of where it's like, oh, that one's a little crazy looking. Everything else is fine, really. iRock Fiction, was Khalida awakened by / merged with Asaf in the end times, or was she under the influence from the Gashes / Archon's reviving magic or her own priest? So Khalida came back with all of the other Tomb Kings during the when his great ritual failed. So Nagash unleashes the great ritual. It awakens pretty much everyone except for Cetra, and that includes Khalida. So Khalida woke up with pretty much all the other Tomb Kings. And then Nagash is killed, and this led to the Tomb Kings all being awake and now not having anyone controlling them. Because Nagash was able to control them while he had the ritual going. But once the ritual failed, he then, they were basically cut loose. And Khalida she fights in Liberus to become the dominant force in Liberus. Because each of the tomb cities had way too many people wake up, because you're having like hundreds of generations of people waking up and all like starting crap with each other. And Khalida was able to become the dominant force in Liberus because she's frankly the most powerful Tomb King there, Tomb Queen in this instance. And she also was the most blessed of Asaf, which directly ties into it. That being said, Khalida does have a unique form of awakening. She does not awaken like most Tomb Kings because she is blessed by Asaf. And what that means is that Khalida, because Asaf is the goddess of Asp's magic and beauty, as well as vengeance. So when Khalida sleeps, Asaf's magic or influence, we'll say divine magic, is so powerful that it causes Khalida to functionally regenerate. So when she, so unlike Cetra, even though the old world has technically changed this, but though I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole other thing. But Khalida, like many Tomb Kings, is not always awake. She takes, there are times where she goes back to her tomb and she rests for time. When Khalida awakens, one of the things that we know about her is that when she awakens, she's got the half mask, right? Her face is only half covered by her funeral mask. When she initially awakens, she looks like a normal human, but she's like beautiful. She's divinely beautiful. So the part of her face you could see and the parts of her body you could see through her like mummy bandages are gorgeous. Like she's like a 10 out of 10 hottie, just absolutely incredibly beautiful woman. But the longer she's awake, the more that starts to fall apart, deteriorate until she looks like her normal desiccated, rotten corpse self. And each time she goes to sleep and then reawakens, she looks that way again. And that is purely because she is Asaf's favored, which is super interesting. Hannibal, which Warhammer character would make the best F1 driver? So who would be the best character at going fast? If he could fit into a car, I feel like it'd be like Nakari, but I don't like fitting him into a car would be a bit of a task. You'd probably want an elf. So probably like Tyrion. Tyrion, I think, would be an excellent F1 driver. Because he would have the physicality and the reaction speed and everything to be like incredible. So probably an elf. You'd probably want like a fast elf, like an elf that's really in their prime, and like lives for speed. Tic-tac-toe. I don't think tic-tac-toe would be that great of an F1 driver. It can claw. Claw would just like try and cause the biggest explosion on the track. It Claw would be trying to kill the other racers to the best of his ability. I think It Claw would be good if it was like Speed Racer, where they're allowed to have like crazy modifications in their cars. That would be Claw's like that. He'd be in the zone. I think for F1 driving, he would just get himself and everyone else killed. John 678. Any retcons you're expecting in the old world? Anything you should be retconned? Also, you should do a lore vid on the different music of each race. That would actually be a really fun one. That would actually be super fun. That'd be a good Lorebeards episode, I think. We'd be talking about music in the Warhammer Fantasy world. That's a good idea. As far as retcons, I'm gonna blow my nose in just a second. Ugh, I hate spring. Allergies. So, do I think? Am I any notable retcons I'm expecting? A lot, to be honest. Those things are kind of hard to predict, but I mean, I think not a lot of things are going to stay the same. Like the affair of the false grail in Bretonia, I think is going to go down very differently. Like I think the broad strokes will stay the same, where it's still going to be Duke Maldred is the bad guy, and he finds the false grail, and he has his sorceress and everything. But I think a lot of the parts surrounding it are going to become very different. As things currently stand, I mean, the biggest thing is I think, and if they're doing this correctly, this should be what they do. So this is something I think they should retcon, is that in the old setting, the Great War Against Chaos is kind of, it's not as big of a war as you'd like it to be, because the lore often kind of treats it like it's World War One or World War Two, where it's like the biggest battle that's happened since the Cataclysm, and it's everybody is involved. Like every single goddamn faction, every race, everybody is fighting. But when you actually sit down and look at the nitty-gritty of it, a lot of the factions aren't really doing anything. Like the Greenskins weren't doing anything. The Tomb Kings weren't doing anything. Bretonia had the Affair of the False Grail, so that kind of counts. Lizardmen weren't doing shit. The Ogre Kingdoms weren't doing anything really. So it was supposed to be, it's treated like it's a global event, but it's not. It's just kind of like, oh, there's a big invasion of Ulthuan, and then there's the big invasion of Kislev that the Empire and the dwarfs go to help out with. So obviously we see here in the old world so far that Games Workshop is just fully retconning that and making it what it should be, where it's going to be a global affair. Like, oh, the Tomb Kings are invading other places. The Greenskins are getting all stirred up. The Grand Cathay is getting involved. So it really should be that it's this big fucking thing where, while the Everchosen himself, when Azavar Kul is marching down from the Chaos Waste, just the fact that there is an Everchosen should be causing shit to hit the fan globally. Because that's the way Everchosens are supposed to work. Everchosens, in my opinion, are their absolute worst when it's like the Everchosen themselves is the only threat. That I'm not a fan of. Like, you want the Everchosen to be the catalyst for the apocalypse, where the moment he is crowned, shit just hits the fan and things get ugly all over the world, as all of the various monsters and creatures and races that are looking for that opportunity to take advantage of the world's natural order, so to speak, being destabilized, strike. Whether it's your Greenskins, your Beastmen, the undead, like the world should be drowning in magic as chaos waxes, which should have dramatic ramifications for all of the others. Like, even if a race is not chaos aligned, so like your Skaven, your Greenskins, your Ogre Kingdoms, your undead, they still can easily take advantage of what's going on because there's a lot more magic present, and all of the various like forces of order are going to be destabilized. So hopefully that helps. The Lizardmen, Exodem, what do they call themselves? So that's a great question. That doesn't actually have a super easy answer, but what about the 11th Everchosen? I don't count him, to be honest. I don't think he should count as an Everchosen, because he has failure to launch syndrome and he never leaves Mordheim. That being said, you could still easily argue that no, he is a successful Everchosen in that when he's crowned by Be'lakor and Be'lakor like possesses him, what you could do is explore that still has global ramifications. That Be'lakor possessing him with the crown makes it where even though he doesn't leave Mordheim, it still has that profound impact on the rest of the world. So during the Mordheim crisis, there's like horrible things happening in Lustria and Cathay and End and Ulthuan and Nagaroth. Like, the various forces of the world still get stirred up by him just existing. As for what the Lizardmen call themselves, in most of the army books that I've read, the closest thing that we have to what the Lizardmen would probably refer to themselves as is the Children of the Old Ones. That would probably be the closest name you could give them that they would probably give themselves. That being said, the Lizardmen are very poorly explored from their own perspective, if that makes sense. In that, like, we don't get to see them refer to themselves in their own language. That would be the best way to put it. You're always having them described from a human godlike perspective. So, like, in English, which is obviously not going to be like 100% one-to-one. Garg, is it possible for a skink to fall in love? Can their curiosities dabble into romance with a human, perhaps? So, is it possible? Sure. It would look very different. It wouldn't look like a human romance. It almost assuredly would not have any kind of like sexual relationship, as Lizardmen do not have sexual organs. They don't have reproductive organs. That being said, you know, humans are a very inventive species. You know, a lot of humans like to seek pleasure by not doing things that aid in reproduction at all, do very different things, but are still considered pleasurable experiences. So even that, I would kind of be like, human's gonna human. what are you gonna do? That being said, like from a very like blunt perspective, the answer would probably be like no. But if you were to get into the nitty gritty of it, yeah, probably that is something that theoretically could happen. Of that, you know, there are things that skinks are very, very social creatures. Skinks really like talking. They are skinks very, very much like being part of social groups. They are extremely kind of cuddly in a sense of that. Skinks, they're cold-blooded, so they seek warmth from other sources, whether that's like bodies of their fellow lizardmen, or sunlight or whatever. So, you know, the idea that someone would have a skink quote unquote partner that is very, very cuddle heavy is certainly possible. But it would be an unusual relationship, to say the least. I imagine a lizardman's version of romance would probably be very, very, very different. Lizardmen would be functionally very asexual, and borderline aromantic, but which there are people like that, so it could work. You know, there are people that are asexual and still have loving relationships. There are people that are aromantic and still can end up in loving relationships. So it could happen, but it would be very weird. It would be, you know, you're functionally dating an alien. So yeah. Quinn, can any elf use magic if they so choose? No. I would say no. Elves, any elf can see magic. Any elf can sense magic. Elves are so deeply magically attuned that they are constantly aware of it, but that does not mean they can wield it. Because the vast majority of elves are not wizards. The vast majority of elves do not use magic in any noticeable way. They do not cast. They do not dispel. Magic is an important part of their lives, in that they sense it, and a lot of their physicality is very strongly related to magic, but that does not mean they're firing off spells. That being said, I would be surprised if elves did not have some minor abilities to influence magic around them. Because unleashing spells, especially when you're talking about like tabletop game type stuff, like battle magic is like big fuck you type spells. There are many forms of magic that are far more subtle. So I could definitely see the argument that the vast majority of elves could perhaps use very subtle, more chill forms of magic, even if they're not using any magic that we would identify as battle magic. That being said, this is one of those circumstances where, and Andy very well may disagree with this, and if he does, I would listen to what he has to say. But my understanding is that no, to be able to utilize magic to its as an elf, you still need to study it. You don't have an innate understanding of it, because it is something that is not deeply innate to an elf. Like, they are magical in a sense of that magic affects them and they're sensitive to it, which means they I think any magic has, I think you could argue that any elf has the capacity to use magic. I think that's fair to say. I think any elf would be capable of using magic, but I don't think every elf can use magic by any means. Theme team, hi Sotek. An interesting Lord Beards episode could be, what is life like for an average citizen of the different realms and races? That would be a really, really good idea. I'll add that onto my list because that is a cool idea. Here we go. Add that one, and then that one. Thank you, Ding Ting. KV1, how powerful is Egrimm van Horstmann? He's super powerful. Egrimm is probably, I would say you could fairly describe Egrimm van Horstmann as one of the most powerful human wizards in the world. He is bonkers. And that's before you consider that he rides on a genuinely immortal chaos dragon, a twin-headed chaos dragon, Baldros. And Baldros is canonically established as a dragon that cannot die. He just can't. Like the original 8 patriarchs, so Volans and his 7 contemporaries, and Teclis successfully captured Baldros, and they could not figure out how to kill him. They just couldn't. Like, with all of their magical skills and their abilities and hanging out with Magnus the Pious and all this other stuff, Baldros was captured, and the conclusion was, we cannot kill this thing. It is not possible. So instead, they sealed him in a chamber beneath the College of Light, until he broke out, thanks to Egrimm van Horstmann, because Egrimm van Horstmann learned he was down there, and Egrimm had this whole big scheme that ended with him breaking Baldros out, because he used Baldros to escape his pursuers. So that being said, Egrimm is obscene. That being said, Egrimm is a little confusing, because his story changes quite a bit depending on which source you're looking at, whether you're kind of looking at like his original tabletop stuff, or you're looking at his Black Library novel, or you're looking at things that kind of refer to him. Because one of the things that's really unclear about Egrimm is it's very there are differences of opinion about when exactly Egrimm fell to chaos, because depending on when he fell says a lot about him. That if you read the Egrimm novel, according to the novel of Egrimm van Horstmann, Egrimm had already functionally fallen to chaos before he joins the colleges of magic. So like he had already dealt with chaos and Tzeentch and everything way before he arrives at the colleges and joins the College of Light, which, in my opinion, makes him more powerful because he's able to hide what he is the entire time. Like, he is in the College of Light, which is the college that specializes in the detection and banishment of chaotic and corruptive influences, corruptive things. And he just snuck in, was there the entire time, and even takes over as patriarch, which is like, Jesus. Now, granted, he hadn't sold his soul to chaos yet. He does that at the end of the story. But like, he was functionally a chaos sorcerer already. But other versions of the story have it where Egrimm was already in the College of Magic and may have already been patriarch, and then he falls to chaos, where he discovers the Skull of Catan, and he talks to it a bunch, and through the knowledge he gains from the Skull of Catan, he ends up falling to chaos because he believes that the colleges of magic are being held back, that humanity and the colleges could achieve so much more if they would basically not follow the restrictions that Teclis put on them and allow humanity to really come into its own and become like masters of magic, which obviously a lot of the colleges would heavily disagree with. So there's different arguments about like when exactly Egrimm becomes the Tzeentch Chaos Sorcerer. But either way, I mean, he was a full patriarch of the College of Light, which light magic is bluntly the most difficult lore of magic to wield for pretty much anybody. But of the 8 battle lores, there we go. Light is the most difficult. So when you consider that he was a patriarch of that college, and then in addition to that, he is like one of Tzeentch's most favored champions. Yeah, he's bonkers. He is a S tier villain. Shane Arlt, do you think we'll see Ingra Deathsword model in the current old world? Yeah, I think Ingra Deathsword will show up, and we'll have a tabletop mini. I think that's very, very likely, because he's a super iconic piece, and it would make a lot of money. And it also requires a little bit less effort from GW than normal because they already have all of his art and inspiration and stuff. The modeler just has to bring him to life. So I think that's quite likely. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I don't think you're going to see Ingra Deathsword until like Cool's Invasion is probably either really close to kicking off or has kicked off. And I suspect Azavar Cool is probably not going to really start to move until like probably like 3rd edition Old World, which is going to be probably a good 5 to 7 years from now. So I think we're still many years away from Ingra Deathsword getting a tabletop mini. Lycor Gaming, who would win, Wallach Harkin versus Tyrion? I would say Wallach Harkin would win. He is far more experienced than Tyrion. Any of the advantages that Tyrion would have for being an elf, Wallach has more extreme versions of that for being a vampire. The only thing I think Tyrion would have going for him would be speed. That would be the only thing I could see being argued, would be that Tyrion would be faster than him. And to Tyrion's credit, Tyrion has fought opponents that are faster than him. And although it was a close thing, he comes out on top. Like when he fought Urian Poisonblade, who was Urian Poisonblade, his speed was literally just like max because he was like an uber dark elf assassin type character, which means he was like maxed out speeds. So I would say now it would be a fight. I don't think Wallach would escape unscathed, and there is certainly a chance he would lose, but I would probably put it like 70-30 in Wallach's favor, especially because Wallach has drank dragon blood. And a vampire that drinks dragon blood is like pinnacle vampire. Like that's how you get absolute top tier. The only exception being like the likes of Manfred Neferata, which are slightly different situations. Source Blood, with Cathay finally coming to the old world, do you think we're going to get the Cathay novels? Yes, I do, 100%. Yep, I do think there will be a Cathay model, and I'm going to be really annoyed if we don't get it with the Cathay release. Games Workshop would be very, very stupid not to release a Grand Cathay novel with the mini range. They unfortunately are really bad about stealth dropping Black Library books. Instead of like revealing them in advance, they tend to just be like, here you go. But we'll have to see. But I have been very disappointed so far with the old world of that we've gotten one book. That has been very disappointing to me. I really feel like we should have had tons of books by now, like at least 4 or 5. The fact that we've got one is obnoxious. It's the end. Any non-Warhammer Fantasy roleplay sources for poisons? I have an apothecary PC looking to make new poisons / potions in Lustria. Want to pull existing lore if I can. Yeah, so there are a number of really well-produced fan supplements for Wolfrup that have expanded information on poisons and potions. Andy Law has actually written for some of them. If you join the Ratcatchers Guild Discord or the Lawhammer Discord, I'm sure you could ask around and find those very easily. That being said, the next best situation would be to look at the old army books that had poisonous creatures, because in the army books, they explain aspects of the toxins. So like if you read like the Lizardmen books, they'll talk about some of the various venoms and poisons and stuff that are used by the Lizardmen. The Dark Elf books have the 3 super famous poisons of like Manbane. Oh god, I can't remember the other 2. I think it's like Manbane, Mandrake something, or like Dark Venom. I don't remember, but I know there's 3 big ones for the Dark Elves. But if you go read through those books, which you can find pretty easily online if you just look around, most of them, when you'll have like especially when you have a poison that's an upgrade. So like if you go to the magic items or the upgrades for like Dark Elf Assassins or whatever, if they have upgrades that allow them to gain poison attacks, they will always explain it there. So like a really famous one for the Lizardman is the Venom of the Firefly Frog. Yeah, so I would just pop around the various books and look for units that have poison attacks and read their descriptions, and then look at their magic items or upgrade lists for like various units and see if one of those contains a poison option. And if it does, read the flavor text. Michael Tusky, are elven souls screwed and just going to Slaanesh? Yes. Yep. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, yes. Yeah, it sucks. Being an elf is really, really nice until you die. Because when you die, you've got basically a one-way ticket to hell. And avoiding it is incredibly difficult. Thoughts on Zacharias the Ever-Living? I thought he got done dirty in the end times. Would you like to see more of him in lore in various games? I love Zacharias. I have been pretty open about the fact that when it comes to vampiric characters, my absolute favorite vampire, right? So not my favorite Necrarch, not my favorite, like whatever, like my absolute favorite vampire out of all vampires is Zacharias the Ever-Living. I adore him. I think he has like a boss ass design. He's very, very fucking cool. I love that he rides a big zombie dragon. I love that he is like a super powerful wizard. He has a really fascinating story, and reading his story, you get to like follow his life from when he was like just a guy to becoming a necromancer to becoming a vampire. he's super cool, and I think he's badass. He absolutely got done dirty in the end times, where he kind of just gets his head exploded by Nagash for kind of like trying to negotiate. Which, granted, probably not the smartest decision he could have made. But to be fair, a lot of characters got screwed over in the end times, and at least Zacharias didn't get like a super garbage story. He just gets killed prematurely. So it could have been worse, but I would definitely like to see much more of him. He is my most desired vampire character for Total War Warhammer, who I have been advocating very heavily for. I really, 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 really want Zacharias super duper badly. That's part of why that's a big reason why I am such a deep proponent of my Vampiric Bloodlines proposal DLC instead of just like a Lord pack with Neferata. Granted, Neferata is probably my second least favorite of the big five. So like the current master of each of the 5 bloodlines. Neferata is probably my second to least favorite. But yeah. So yeah, I'd like to see a lot more of them. Zar94, after Cetra spent 5 years slaying Norska to get all his goodies back, why didn't they stay or at least keep a sizable force there? Seems like Cetra would probably want to keep what he took. Because at the end of the day, Norska is not the kind of place that I think Cetra would be that interested in. Of that, in order to set up a lot of the things that he would want to set up, he would have to leave a sizable legion that would suffer a lot of difficulties due to the fact of how close Chaos was. And ultimately, Cetra's not an idiot, right? Like, Cetra is incredibly arrogant, and he is spiteful, but he's not stupid. And for Cetra, I think he's very keenly aware of the fact, as someone who fought against the Legions of the North many, many times, that if he had set up a forward base in Norska, it would have been absolutely doomed. Like, it was going to be murdered the moment he left, and he wouldn't want to stay there. That's not where Cetra wants to be. Cetra's goal, even though he didn't pursue it back in Warhammer Fantasy, but he's starting to pursue it in the old world, which is really nice to see. But Cetra's goal is to reclaim the ancient Nehekaran Empire first. And then once he's taken back all of his old territory, then he'll look into expanding further. But Norska is not part of ancient Nehekara. Never was. And very much as part of that, I don't think Cetra would be interested in conquering it until he was able to establish a good foothold. Because if there was an issue and he needed reinforcements, his reinforcements would have to travel all the way from Xandri, which is a long way. That is at least several weeks of sailing. And it's doomed. It's a doomed expedition. Cetra went in there with a very clear purpose, which was to go in and reclaim every single coin and treasure that had been stolen by the Norskins when they got frankly lucky and killed him during an invasion of Kimri. And so he went in, he accomplished the mission, and he left, which is genuinely the smartest way to handle that. He didn't overextend. So yeah. Acne Zebra, please tell the Dark Gods /CA to make better use of the Changelings Theater mechanic for victory conditions. Give factions a reason to go across the map. Oh, you mean for like other factions? Yeah, I mean that one's a little tricky. Like, generally speaking, you want a character's campaign to be focused on where they are and relevant to who they are. As far as like inspiring the player to leave their kind of natural theater and go conquer the world, there are incentives to do that, but they're There are things like the Sword of Cain, the Nemesis Crown, landmarks. So the theater system, I don't think would necessarily be the best way to deal with that. Because I think that's more specific for characters that have almost more of like a spy assassin type theme to them. You know, people that are invested in global politics, which is not the vast majority of characters. Like I could see someone like Neferata caring about theaters of war. I could see like Marathi caring about theaters of war. But the vast majority of Warhammer characters are not manipulators. They're, you know, busy, just focused on their own shit. And the only reason the Changeling really has theaters is because he's not a conquer the world type character, which is how most characters function. Like your goal is to take over your theater, and that's your campaign. Like congratulations, you've gotten the long campaign victory was probably you taking over your theater, which is like your continent. Beyond that, that's kind of supposed to be where you end your campaign. Like that's supposed to be you going, great, I did it. So I'm going to start a new campaign now. As opposed to, because what I'll say to this is this kind of falls under over 100 legendary lords in the game. So that is a just staggering amount of different experiences to engage in. This kind of thing would really only make sense for if you're playing the same character over and over again. Which I do think it would be nice for CA to mess around with this, but I would not consider it a priority, if that makes sense. This is, in my opinion, this should kind of be what the... I think there are two things that would be good for this. The first is that I would like to see CA do this. I think it would be cool if CA introduced a new mechanic that gave you a random start location. Where it's very much intended to be a much higher difficulty and it's not balanced. Like that would be the thing I would say is that it should not be a balanced game mode. So it shouldn't be like, because if CA has to worry about making it balanced, so making it like approachable for new players or easier campaigns, then it's immediately going to fail because it's going to require too much effort. But I think for people that want like new challenges, a randomized start position mode, I think would be really, really popular because that would just throw you somewhere new and then you just got to deal with what's going on around you. And the other thing that I could see them doing that might be interesting is if they were to give certain dilemmas or benefits to when you control an entire continent. So like if you successfully take over all of Lustria, or what the game considers to be Lustria, then you get some kind of trigger for an event or a dilemma or a buff that comes into action and is like, hey, you took over all this, so you get this. Which could be fun for people that really want to take over, like paint the map, and make it a little more exciting. But ultimately, I feel like paint the map campaigns should not be incentivized because that's not really like, that is like so far beyond the term of late game that like a 1% of the player base, if that is going to get that far. The vast majority of people, it's lucky if they finish a long campaign victory, much less a domination victory. But I'll kick around some ideas. I'll definitely try and do that. Theme team, I forgot to ask before, how would you roleplay Teto Echo and Wolfrup? My players might meet him at the Conclave of Light and Game. Oh, that's crazy, but super fun. So Tic-Tac-Toe is actually probably a relatively straightforward player or character, as far as Tic-Tac-Toe is a scout. And but he's also a skink that rides a pterodon. So it is likely that on top of having experience as a scout, he also had experience as a messenger. Because a lot of his role is making sure that messages get to the appropriate people. And we know that he's a very, very skilled commander of pterodon squads. As far as what he's like, as far as role-playing him, Teto Echo is a skink. So skinks naturally have... Oh, sorry, Teto Echo, not Tic-Tac-Toe. Ugh, gosh. Teto Echo. Teto Echo being at the Conclave of Light would actually be... I don't know if that would be more or less interesting. Probably about the same. Sorry, Teto Echo. So Teto Echo, who is the head astromancer priest of Tloxlon. So you're dealing with a skink that is old. Very, very old skink. He's over 100 years old. Most skinks do not live that long. They tend to have like relatively human lifespans. So you're dealing with a character that is incredibly ancient by skink standards. So he's going to be relatively fragile. He's gonna, he's floating around on his big mobility scooter. He's got his palanquin to help him get around. And as far as initial approach, he would be very interesting at that kind of meeting because he is guarded by Temple Guard. And Temple Guard are very intimidating because, they're these 8 to 9 foot tall lizard just statues that are not the best at they can be overly perceptive to potential threats, which means that if your party is dealing with Teto Echo, they're also dealing with Temple Guard. And while Teto Echo is going to be very, very skilled at controlling them, your PCs will need to be very cautious about not potentially even accidentally threatening him. That being said, Teto Echo has a couple of big things going for him. The first is that he is an astromancer. He is a master of scrying the heavens and seeing the future. He is like one of the best in the setting at doing it. And for Teto Echo, he is probably, if you're a group of humans dealing with Teto Echo, he would probably be vaguely annoying to deal with because a lot of his focus is not going to be on what's happening right now, but what is going to happen. And most Heavens wizards, when they're dealing with what's going to happen, they tend to speak in like kind of riddles. And Teto Echo, his Reichspiel is not his first language. So he's probably going to have really bizarre ways of communicating the information that he's trying to give you. And it's probably going to come off as very esoteric and like weird. And he also is not going to he's not going to care about what you care about. That would be probably the biggest thing. Is Teto Echo will be, I don't think he'll be nearly as talkative as most skinks will be. He'll talk a lot slower because he's much older. Like he'll still be relatively talkative, especially compared to anything like a Saurus. Like he still talks quite a bit, but he's a lot calmer, a lot less skittish. And he is focused on what is to come and what matters for the great plan. Which means that from Teto Echo's perspective, if he's dealing with humans or some other race, his goal is to manipulate you into doing what he wants you to do. Which may not be in your best interest. As far as the great plan is concerned, it might be better for you to go and fight in some epic battle against Archaon that's going to get you killed, but it delays Archaon enough that this ideal situation for the Lizardmen pans out. So he's going to be kind of a difficult character to deal with because most characters are probably going to want to try and use him as a mentor-like figure to get information that they want, and he's not going to do that. He's just not. He's not going to play ball with that. And he is going to give you the information that he wants to give you, and try and get you to do what he wants you to do. But he's going to have difficulties communicating complex ideas So I would very deliberately have him come off as almost frustratingly mysterious, not because he's trying to be, but because you have a character that is attempting to communicate incredibly complex information over a language barrier that is very difficult to surmount. So hopefully that helps. Need to blow my nose again. Oh, goodness. Sotek, who is Gilead Lothian? Or Lothian? Oh, man, Gilead. So Gilead is the main character from the Gilead novel series, which was a collection of 2 or 3 books. It was what? Gilead's Curse, Gilead's Blood, and I think like one other one. Oh boy. So Gillian is he's in a much older book series. He's a descendant of one of the High Elf colonies, Toranrock, I think. And he's a High Elf that is like the last of his line, and basically his storyline is about him kicking around the old world, beating the shit out of bad guys. And which cool in and of itself is cool. And he also like has a manservant or something that travels around with him. But Gilead's story takes place in a lot of Oldhammer. So when you read his books, you will see some weird shit, like some super weird stuff, because he was just written in an older age. His novels don't hold up super well into the modern setting. They hold up okay, but there's definitely some weirdness. But he does get into some pretty interesting battles. Like he finds like an abandoned elven colony that's just full of chaos elves. So he fights like a shitload of mutant elves. There's one where he fights a bunch of Skaven. There's one where, if I remember correctly, he finds a portal into the realm of chaos, and he like goes and does some shenanigans in there. He gets around, but that's really all there is to say about him. Outside of like doing a deep dive on his narrative, is that he comes from a 2 or 3 part book series, from I don't think it was even Black Library back then. I think it was either Black Industries or it was known as something else. It might have been Black Library already back then, but it's an older series. It's fun enough. He's a super gloomy High Elf. He's basically Gotrek, but a High Elf. That's honestly the best way to describe him. Biofbud, when does the channel become a Stardew Valley streaming channel? Never. I will never ever play Stardew Valley, because I know if I go into that pit, I'm never coming out. And I already have infinite things to do. So never, never on this earth. Tasty Builders, Total War / Warhammer fans, is there anything that gamers can be excited for to be added to the game in the future? Any predictions or witches? Tons of new characters. I still think we have quite a ways to go DLC wise. Probably the biggest thing that we're super hoping for would be new races being introduced. That would probably be like the most exciting thing. I would absolutely love for there to be for us to get everybody. I mean, I think it is very, very, very practically guaranteed we're going to get some element of the Dogs of War. I don't know exactly what of the Dogs of War. Like, I don't know if it's going to be like, oh, it's full Talea, or it's Talea, Estalia, and Araby, or it's just the mercenary units. But regardless, it'll probably be a big fun thing. And I am desperately hoping that we will get the Kingdoms of End, the Naga of Koresh, Nippon, and the Hobgoblin Khanate. I'm really pulling for that Eastern Theater to get fully fleshed out. I don't know if it's going to happen. It feels very unlikely, but I hope it happens. But as far as predictions go, I feel pretty confident that you're still going to see quite a few Lord packs, and you'll probably see at least one more race, more than likely being the Dogs of War. I do hope that the Eastern Theater gets fully expanded on. We get everybody. Like, I hope we even get the Fishmen towards the end. Yeah, lots of cool shit still coming down the chute for Total War, I think. And that's even before like what the distant future holds. Like, I would be willing to bet you $1 billion that Total War Warhammer 40,000 is coming down the chute. And it would not surprise me if once Total War Warhammer 40,000 as a trilogy or quadrilogy or whatever the fuck it's going to be, once that's done, it would not surprise me for there to be after that a Total War Warhammer Age of Sigmar or Total War Warhammer Old World. Neither of those, none of that would shock me in the slightest. I think Total War and Games Workshop's relationship will last for many, many, many years. Hatch is chosen. Hi, big fan. Oh, well, thank you. Writing a short story on Chaos Dwarf online. The forums, I think, about what really happened in Uzkalak. Will this offend the lore too much, or is it an interesting idea? No, man, go for it. Go for it. We have no idea what went down in Uzkalak. Like, the only things we know are that the Chaos Dwarfs got surrounded by some kind of Chaos army. I like to say it was the Tong that surrounded them because it works out pretty well timeline-wise. Funny enough, there's actually a big issue with the original Chaos Dwarf lore by Rick Priestley that's just wrong. Like, it's just wrong. Where Rick Priestley's version says that the Chaos Dwarfs were like surrounded because like it's like, oh, it's like a great demonic horde because of the cataclysm, even though the great cataclysm ends like centuries before the Chaos Dwarfs even go to Uzkalak. So like Uzkalak as a whole is not even founded until after the cataclysm. And so that's not what it was. But which you'll often see that repeated in the like some of the Chaos Dwarf lore stories, is that it'll always be like, oh, the cataclysm is what cut off the dwarfs from the Chaos Dwarfs. It's like, no, it wasn't. No, that's not correct. That is empirically wrong. That's just not correct. But God forbid anybody check the timelines. But all we know is they got surrounded by a Chaos Horde. The end. And they fall to Hachette. But outside of that, we have no idea what went down in Uzkalak. So I would say go wild with it, have fun. I don't think. And plus, even if you're gonna do something that the lore wouldn't necessarily support, fuck it, have fun. Warhammer Fantasy goes through dramatic changes all the time. There's plenty of things where there are plenty of things that happen where the lore will suddenly take a hard left turn and it makes people really pissed off. And that's fine. So I would say never worry about offending the lore because it's not that ironclad, dude. I mean, look at like an easy example is like there are still a lot of people who don't like that Karl Franz is like an epic hero, greatest statesman, super cool guy, because the Karl Franz they had back in like 3rd edition Warhammer to like 5th edition Warhammer was not that. He was like a really pitiful old man. Because Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition explored a lot about the setting, including Karl Franz, and that Karl Franz was basically a weak old man. He was a terrible emperor and was not a great guy, and is like poisoned and suffers immensely, and ultimately he dies. Like he's really supposed to die at the end of the story. And then later Warhammer was like, nope, he's got Golmaraz and he rides on a griffin and he's a super cool badass. And there are a lot of people that really hate that version of Karl Franz because that's not their version of Karl Franz. So, and that's like, you know, that happened like 30 years ago now, almost. Well, more like 20 years ago. But so like you get the point. So don't worry about it. And like in more recent times, like the old world has come out and in my opinion fixed Bretonnia, where I have always felt very, very strongly that Bretonnia being a super sexist nation never made any fucking sense. Like I could see pretty interesting aspects of sexism being relevant, like the Empire. But in the land where their goddess is the Lady of the Lake, and you've got characters like fucking Rapunzel de Lines kicking around. To me, the idea that it's like, oh well, women can't be knights, that never made sense in my opinion. And the old world came out and was like, okay, yep, that's not a thing. Like that's no longer a thing. Men and women can be knights, and Bretonnia is about classism. Which, granted, a lot of the Warhammer world is about classism. Classism is by far the most relevant thing in the Warhammer fantasy world. Sexism is not super there in Warhammer fantasy in general. It exists, and it actually exists in places where a lot of people don't expect. Like in both Bretonnia and Nagaroth. Well, not both, but Bretonnia, Nagaroth, and Kislev. Men are not allowed to be wizards, which is really interesting. And it's kind of like a flip on what you might expect. You know, in most settings, you're like, oh, well, women aren't allowed to do a thing, but when men can, whereas Warhammer Fantasy spins that on its head, where you're not allowed to practice magic or be a wizard if you are in Nagaroth, Bretonnia, or Kislev. Though in Bretonnia, you can practice magic if you're a guy, just you can't be a native Bretonian. Because the courts bring in male men from other parts of the world. So like wizards that were trained in the colleges of magic of the Empire serve in Bretonnia as like advisors and battle wizards and stuff. And there are also wizards that come in from like Astalia and Talea and stuff that also work and live in Bretonnia and still cast magic. But native born Bretonians are not allowed to be wizards if they're men, because they'll get taken by the Fanchantress and yada yada. So anyway, I would say never worry about like offending the lore, because it's not that ironclad. It's not that ironclad. Stuff changes. Pancreas's silliest clown. Can all gods have demons? Yes, but they're not called demons at that point. Demon is a somewhat misleading term, because it if you hear the word demon, your brain is going to think evil, right? Like the demons of the dark gods are horrible, horrible creatures. They are twisted abominations that are going to kill you. They're going to kill you. However, the other gods do have demons, but they're usually not referred to as demons. They're usually called divine servants. But functionally, they're demons. Like for all intents and purposes, they're demons. They're the exact same thing. They're just not necessarily as dangerous. They likely are just as dangerous. But you probably have to do something a little more extra to piss them off, as opposed to just existing. But like some good examples of divine servants are Petra or Thra, depending on how you pronounce it. The god of the sun and the big boss, the head honcho of the Nehekaran pantheon when Nehekara was alive. Obviously, Usirian has eclipsed him in importance after Nehekara died, but during the good old days of Nehekara being in its prime, Thra was the big bad of the Nehekaran pantheon. He was the king of the gods and the god of the sun. And we know that Thra had servants, divine servants, and his were angels. They are literally angels. They were large. They were fairly large humanoid creatures with great angelic wings. that came down and smited the enemies of Nehekara. We don't know a lot about them, but we know they existed. And we also know they all died horribly when Nagash destroyed them. Because Thra unleashed them against Nagash in the... I want to say it was the second war when Nagash was already in Nagashazar and he was doing more delegation shenanigans. I think that's when he fought Thra's divine servants. I don't think it was during the first war. But regardless of which war it was, Nagash fights them and he beats them. And Nagash being Nagash, instead of destroying them and sending them back into the ether, Nagash uses his sorcery to capture them and he remakes them into his own image. So he captures these divine servants and he uses magic to twist and contort them and make them into horrible undead abominations, which is where we get the Morghast from. So the Morghast Archai and the Morghast Harbinger, which if you look at them, you may notice they kind of look like horrible, big, skeletal angel things. And that's because they originally were like angelic angel type creatures that Nagash just grabbed them and he remade them into his own image. Zach R. for Wolfrip. What would you do next after Dawi / High Elf / Marienburg books to expand to a new location? Cathay, Talea? What's needed? New campaign like Emmy Within? Zach, in my opinion, I think, so I am not in charge at C7, obviously. But if I was in charge, I think the thing that players need is a new campaign. I would take all those new books that we just made and I would do a campaign that journeys across them. So what I would do, that's what I would do actually. So what I would do is I would do a book that starts off with characters dealing with the dwarfs. So I'd be like, okay, your campaign starts in the mountains and you start dealing with like Carrick Norn. And then, so you start in the Grey Mountains or Carrick Norn. Is that who the new book is kind of on? It's like the Lords of Stone Steel book. It's like the Dwarf Empire and Carrick something. I can't remember if it's Carrick Norn or Carrick Hearn, but I know they're like it looks like one of the dwarf holds is going to get slightly more focused than the others. I think it's Carrick Norn, but I would start in whatever that hold was and be like, okay, this is where your adventure begins, is dealing with these dwarfs. And then the second, and then the series should take you from dealing with the dwarfs to dealing with Marienburg. And then you set off from Marienburg and you quest across the ocean to Ulthuan. And then you have your whole thing in Kothic in Ulthuan. And then the adventure takes you to Lustria for the finale. That's what I would do. I would use the books that C7 has been publishing, and I would release an adventure series that ties them all together to be like, hey, have you been collecting all these books? Well, here you go. Here's a grand adventure that crosses all of these territories. That would be the smart thing to do, in my opinion. Let's see. Ricky Chapman, how many Chaos Warriors from Fantasy has survived into Age of Sigmar? We could see some of the Everchosen's Vanguard being from Fantasy. Also, how did Tarmakon return? So Tarmakon did not return. He's just dead. Okay. So hold on. So in first edition Age of Sigmar, they did a thing where they allowed you to play with anything from Warhammer Fantasy. So all the Forge World stuff, all the Warhammer Fantasy stuff, all of it. And when you did that, they included little lore blurbs about those things. But this included shit like Thorgrim Grudgebearer, Krokgar, anything that had a mini, Cetra the Imperishable, even though none of those characters, as far as we know, are in Age of Sigmar. So Tarmakon is currently just dead. Like after he is killed during the Tarmakon storyline, he is deceased. He is gone forever. And he has not returned in Age of Sigmar. So I would say he is not an AOS at all whatsoever. That being said, how many characters survived into AOS from Fantasy? We have no idea. Now we do know that when Chaos won in the fantasy world, they scooped up a whole bunch of people that were like their guys, and they basically took them to new campaigns on other worlds. Because by the time we get to Age of Sigmar, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years have passed since Warhammer Fantasy. Like, Age of Sigmar is like millions of years in the future. And in that time, Archaon has gone on to destroy multiple realities, multiple planets. Because he is the Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse. And one of the things that's mentioned is that he has gone on to destroy a bunch of other places, where the great game of the Dark Gods continued on a bunch of new worlds. And Archaon would show up and basically bring that war to an end in his favor. So it could be that, millions of Chaos Warriors survived from Fantasy to Age of Sigmar, though I really doubt that. I would say it's probably a fairly small number, so it's probably like in the thousands, maybe, because for a Chaos Warrior to have made it to AOS, they would have had to survive multiple campaigns fighting across multiple realities, which seems unlikely. I would guess the vast majority of them are probably deceased, or ascended into demon princes, or are in the Varangard. Because any warrior that's lived for that long is either a special character, a demon prince, or in the Varangard, which are all pretty limited space groups. Because like the Varangard's not that big. The Varangard is relatively small. And only a fraction of the Varangard are going to be like ancient warriors from forgotten times, So I would say hundreds, maybe a couple thousand. Brock, love the Hell Pit stream. Inspired me to design a Euro style board game based on it. Oh, that sounds super fucking cool, dude. So far, it's like Lords of Waterdeep mixed with Bears versus Babies. I've not played with either of those games, but that is very funny to hear. That sounds super cool. I would love to know more about that when you have it in a place where you feel like you're ready for people to start playing it. Feel free to keep us posted. Sean Soltz, how likely is it for a Dogs of War for Total War? How likely is a Dogs of War DLC for Total War featuring 3 small one-army factions? Your predictions on it. How likely is it? Not super likely. I would love for that to be the case, but that would be kind of small, in my opinion, because it would be so different to what we're used to. It would be very, very different than what we've seen before, which makes it less likely, but doesn't mean I don't want it to happen. If it was going to happen, I would very much love for it to be like 1 legendary lord per faction. Maybe Talea, because Talea actually has like a lot more pre-established units and characters and stuff. Talea, I would be fine with having 2 legendary lords, and then you give like Estalia 1 and Araby 1. And like I said earlier, if I could get Lucrezia Belladonna, Borgio the Besieger, the Golden Magus, and like an Estalian queen or king or something, or like a Grand Inquisitor of Myrmidia or something. I don't think Myrmidia would use Inquisitors. A Grand Matriarch of Myrmidia would be goated. That would be super cool. Or you could do like a Grand Inquisitor of Solcon. That would be terrifying. But I think a Myrmidian High Priest would be an ideal legendary lord from Estalia. And then just adapt what rosters. For Araby, you could just adapt their Warmaster roster. Araby was actually a fully playable faction in Warmaster. They were fully playable in old Warhammer Fantasy as well. But Warmaster had like a really good roster for Araby. Now there are parts of it you'd have to update so they make sense in like the modern setting. So like I would not use genies as just like random creatures. I would say that like, oh, they get djinns, which are lesser elementals of Akshi. They get, or wait, no. A djinn should be a lesser elemental of Hish. That's right, because it's like a wind spirit, which the lore of light has some associations with that based on how it's been interpreted by authors. So like we know that the incarnate elemental of light is often viewed as a wind spirit by the people that have seen them. So like I would love for there to be lesser elementals of light that are the djinns and have a very wind elemental aspect to them. Then you'd have your ifrits, which are your elementals of Akshi, and then probably what, like naiads or some other, I forget what, I don't know if naiad, because naiads are similar to what I want in Bretonnia, but the naiads of Bretonnia, well, I mean, you can use them for both, to be honest, because the naiads of Bretonnia are river and lake spirits, but the naiads of Araby are ocean spirits. So, but you could use a similar term. But I would do water elementals, fire elementals, and wind elementals, which you could interpret as life, fire, and light for Total War. But Merid. I don't know if that's a D&D thing or if that's like a historical thing. But you'd want to find like an appropriate type spirit. You know, for Araby, you'd want your camel knights, you'd want your long gunner Jezzails riding on camels, you'd want your carpet riders where they're able to like throw weapons from the flying carpets, you'd want your different kinds of cool warriors like your dervishes, and like all of your other types of like infantry and stuff. Pretty fun mix of like black powder and then like the desert tribes, which are like camel and horse riding cavalry that specialize in like hit and run warfare and stuff. You can do a lot. You can do a lot with Araby. The big thing I would generally recommend is that Talea brings in your pike and shot. Talea brings your pike and shot into the game. They bring a lot of your like more elaborate black powder weapons, like your siege equipment. They also bring in a lot of your specialist infantry. Araby brings in a lot of your specialist cavalry, long range, but not artillery black powder, and magic. Like Araby is the magic part of the faction with all of the spirits, like all the different elemental creatures. I would give them incarnate elementals as like the big monsters. So I would give them the incarnate elemental of fire, the incarnate elemental of life, and the incarnate elemental of light, which are like big and spooky. So they're like your monster magic part of the faction with like camel riders and stuff. And then Astalia you'd use Astalia to fill in what's left, to be honest. Because Astalia is not very well explored. So I would take what we know about Talea and Araby, design the roster, and then look for any holes. And any holes that remained, I would fill with Astalia. So like if you wanted like, oh, we need some not camel knight tier, but like we need some basic knights that wear heavy armor, that would be good for Astalia, because Astalia is known for having a really extreme knight culture. Or like we need like a hybrid melee ranged unit of infantry, so people that wield like rapier and gun, pistol. Astalia could work for that, stuff like that. We need like a lot of Myrmidian type units. Well, let's make Astalia the like Myrmidian focus, so they get like a lot of the religious elite units, or they get the priest units and stuff like that. So that's how I would mess around with that. Blue milk alien monster. Do all dwarves turn to stone if they use magic? No. They only turn to stone if they use magic and they lose control of it. So, I mean, Chaos Dwarfs show us that dwarfs can use magic without turning to stone. However, they also show us that if they fuck up, parts of them will turn to stone. Generally speaking, dwarfs of the Warhammer world do not use magic, can't use magic, except for when they can. But most of the time they can't. The vast majority of the time they can. But like, there's a scene in the War of Vengeance trilogy where there's this really powerful rune lord who basically attempts to channel magic and he fails because he doesn't know what he's doing, to be very blunt. And he tries to tap into a source of power that is anathema to him, and it causes him to petrify. And he dies. So do they all turn to stone if they use it? Not necessarily, but most likely. Skylar, Eshin Maneater should Naruto run in Total Warhammer 3, yes or no? It would be a hilarious reference, but I don't think it would look that great. And also, I feel like the way ogres' bodies are designed, if they Naruto run, it would just look really weird because of the way their like guts would push up against the rest of their body by trying to lean forward like that. So I think from like an animation perspective, it would look really bad without like some really careful effort, which wouldn't be worth it. Though it is very funny to imagine. Quinn, can elves become ghosts? Yes, we know several elven ghosts. The most famous one being Phoenix King. Ooh, was it Morvale? No, it was Belcor Hadris, I think. Pretty sure it was Belcor Hadris. But the Phoenix King that was responsible for the building of the White Tower of Hoeth, his ghost is still wandering around the White Tower. His body was buried amongst its foundations, which the end times conveniently forgot. And he also, but his spirit roams the White Tower and is known for helping students that are lost or looking for some like really specific tome or something that's like impossible to find without his help. Super Orlock, hey Sotek, what level of elf mage is more powerful than the most powerful human wizards in the world? Is it like older archmages or like John Doe? So I would say that the average John Doe archmage is going to be notably more powerful than 99.9% of human wizards. That being said, that last 0.1% of human wizards are absolutely fucking bonkers. They are bonkers. And that being said, even within that, I would say probably like the top, you could probably safely say that the top 25% of archmages are superior to any human wizard. Any of them. The only exception being like fully jacked chaos sorcerers, because at that point they're not really human, and they've got the power of the most powerful gods in the setting behind them. So I don't think they really count. Necromancer Kobold, how many more regiments of renowns could Goldfat Maneater realistically get into War 3? Could he have any legendary heroes from the other factions? So if they do Goldfat Maneater correctly, which I think they should, he should get any regiment of renown that originates from the Dogs of War. So, for instance, the one that he does not have access to right now that he should is Ogla Khan's Wolf Boys, which are the Hobgoblin Wolf Rider Regiment of Renown. They originate from the Dogs of War, so they should be available to go to Goldfat Maneater. But I would make it that, which is very simple and straightforward. If a regiment of renown originates from the Dogs of War book or the Dogs of War White Dwarf supplements, then Goldfat should have access to them because he is functionally a Dogs of War army. As far as legendary heroes go, the only legendary heroes that are in the game that I think it would make sense to add to Golgfag Maneater would be Gotrek and Felix. I think Gotrek and Felix would be completely fair and fine to add into their roster. Maybe not in multiplayer, but in single player. Vivi Core, thank you so much for gifting a membership. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I didn't see that until just now. Thank you. Oh my god, there's so many super chats that I have to get through. Holy shit. Okay, I'm gonna speed up just a little bit. Kolek versus Nakari or Kugath or Scar or Kairos. Kolek Suneater is a brute. He is an absolute fucking menace. This might be controversial, but I would say that that Kolek Suneater could reliably defeat any of the Gritter Demon special characters. I think he would beat any of them. Now, I do think it would be a kaiju battle. I do think it would be very, very dangerous, and I think Kolek would probably get hurt, like noticeably hurt, against any of them. But I think that he is ultimately enough of a borderline demigod that he would defeat any of them. Kolek is horrifying in a way that Total War and the tabletop game do not do justice. They have never been able to properly do justice to how fucking scary he is. I mean, in Total War, he's not nearly as big as he's supposed to be. In Total War, he should be like twice that size. So yeah, he is monstrous. And greater demons are big and nasty, and especially the big named ones. But Kolek is like, you have to remember that you have ultimately a material creature that is older than chaos. He's older than chaos. If you go by the theory, which I personally do, but I know not everyone does. But if you go by the theory that the dark gods of Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle did not even exist until the Cataclysm, or at least right before the Cataclysm, Kolek Suneater is older than the dark gods. But at the very least, he is older than Chaos being on this planet. The dude is obscene. Mobarak, what army would you like to be updated? I would like to see Araby because we only have a Hollywood version. Hard agree. If I had to pick one faction right now at this moment that exists in the Warhammer canon to receive an update, it would be Araby. Not even close. Not even close. Araby would be like my top 5 picks. It would be Araby. Because I think that they are a critically important faction to Warhammer Fantasy. And for building the global timeline, for building humanity's timeline, they are critically important. And a part of me feels very strongly that there is a very strong stigma against them, because a lot of people seem to feel that you cannot depict Middle Eastern inspired factions in modern settings for some reason, even though that's happened a lot in modern settings in like a lot of video games and stuff. But I've met so many people, and so many people have left comments saying that, Araby can't be done. It can't be done in today's world, which is bullshit. That is absolute bullshit. If you can do Grand Cathay, you can do Araby. I think it would be perfectly fine. So they would be who I would feel the most strongly would benefit, especially because they make up a very significant part of what we understand as the old world, being that huge northwestern chunk of the Southlands. They're a very critical faction that also give the Tomb Kings something to do besides just fight greenskins. So I would very much like to see Araby. Thank you for the super chat, by the way. Hound of Ill Omens, thank you very much. 2 questions. What character is the most like Iron Man? Not only smart, but with a magical suit of armor. Ikit Claw. Ikit Claw is literally Warhammer Fantasy Iron Man. If you're going for they have to be human, then it's Balthazar Gelt. Balthazar Gelt would be the closest thing. But if you're going for, I want an arrogant tech genius character that was fabulously wealthy and wielded a significant amount of influence and was having sex with whoever he wanted and was really famous and powerful. And then he got a little too arrogant for his britches, creating weapons of mass destruction that it literally blew up in his face and caused him what should have been a deadly energy, but he created a suit of armor that allowed him to stay alive, and it also augmented his fighting prowess and helped him develop into a new stage of life. That's literally Ikit Claw. Like that is just Ikit Claw's storyline, where Ikit Claw was a really powerful sorcerer scientist of Clan Skryre before, when he was working on some great invention, there's a horrible lab accident where it blows up and it badly burns his body and hurts him really bad. And he was supposed to die, but he builds himself a iron exoskeleton. Because that's the thing. Ikit Claw is not wearing a suit, right? In the sense that he can't just take it off. It is a part of his body and like sustains him. It's also a suit of armor. But it's referred to as an exoskeleton. Yeah, I would say Ikit Claw is very similar. Astrogoth, I mean, kinda. Astrogoth isn't as much like a guy that suffered an accident. He's more of that he's just gotten so old that he doesn't have the mobility that he used to have, would be the way that I would put it. Plus, interestingly enough about Astrogoth did not actually build his own suit. Astrogoth basically oversaw the building of his little mecha suit. But it was actually built by his like students or his lessers, because he didn't really get around to building it until he was already so petrified that his body couldn't move the way it needed to in order to build the damn thing. So he's the genius behind it, but he didn't actually build it himself. Which is actually quite funny. But Ikit Claw did. Ikit Claw did build his own suit. The Game Doctor, thank you so much for the 15 months of membership. Thank you very much. Do you think we're going to get another vampire update along with another Legendary Lord DLC, or do you think we won't? I hope so. The Game Doctor, I can tell you 100% sure. Not I'm theorizing, not I'm hypothesizing. I am 100% sure there will be a DLC for the Vampire Counts. What I do not know is if it's going to be a Lord Pack DLC where you get one Vampire Count Lord with like 5 new units, or if it's going to be what I hope it will be, which is the Vampiric Bloodlines DLC, which is like the Champions of Chaos DLC, where it'll be 4 Legendary Lords that are all vampires, and it comes with a selection of new units, reskins for certain units, and a bunch of unique mechanical gimmicks for the various types of Vampire Count Bloodlines. So there will be like a noticeable... So like how if you play Warriors of Chaos, but if you play Valkia, Village, Archaon, Festus, or Azazel, they all have very different mechanics. Like, they're similar. The core gameplay style is the same, but they have very, very unique gimmicks in addition to it that make them almost feel like completely different factions. That's what I hope they'll do, but it'll be for, the 5 bloodlines. So you'll have your Manfred von Karstein as your big von Karstein character, and then you get Zacharias the Everliving for Necrarchs, Neferata for Lamians, Vorag, Bloody Tooth for the Strigoi, and Wallach Harkin for the Blood Dragons. And they all have that same shared core Vampire Count experience, but then they have their own unique gimmicks on top of it. And obviously, you would also have your Helmengorst is over there being Helmengorst, and Vlad von Karstein and Isabella could get tied in a little more to the Empire, like Electric Count system. Marathi, how do you think Egrimm and Advisor would get along? Funny enough, I think they wouldn't. In a very funny way. I think the Advisor would probably very much dislike Egrimm. I'm sure Egrimm would like him well enough as like, oh man, what a useful asset to have, like someone that can very reliably see the future and also see the past and like all of this crazy information that I would not have access to otherwise. Actually, funny enough, I think Egrimm would be one of the characters that would try to imprison the Advisor, because the Advisor, his whole motivation is he's trying to get away from his circumstance, right? He's trying to break free of Tzeentch's control, which is very ironically something Egrimm tried to do, and it didn't work out for Egrimm. So I think they're very similar characters. There was a really popular fan theory going into, I think, Warhammer 3. It might have been Warhammer during Warhammer 1, but either during Warhammer 1 or going into Warhammer 3, there was a very popular fan theory that the Advisor literally was Egrimm von Horstmann. Like it wasn't that he was similar. A lot of people believed that he was just Egrimm, because his story was so similar. Because if you know the Advisor's story, the Advisor was a light wizard that falls to chaos and falls to Tzeentch, because he goes after the Tome of Fates, because he's a goober. Siegfried, what do we know about the Hobgoblin Incarnate beyond them being hobgoblins raiding big wolves? Go watch the Lorebeards episode about hobgoblins, where we talk about literally everything. The biggest thing that I will add for your bits there, which I appreciate very much, would be that we know the Hobgoblin Incarnate is completely mobile. They're nomadic. So they have cities, but their cities aren't moved. So they have like these great massive tent cities that are built on wooden platforms, and the wooden platforms are dragged around by like dozens, if not hundreds, of giant wolves pulling them. And there are also like references to other creatures like the hobhounds, which hobhounds are technically a distinct species of creature. So yeah, they got stuff going on. Biofoot, what's the coolest thing you've gotten from Craigslist for free? I've never used Craigslist in my life. I've never used it. Do I think Franz Lohner is Morgan Bernhardt? Yes, I do. I do believe that Franz Lohner is in truth Morgan Bernhardt. I am a follower of that theory. Walking Tree, are the dwarven ancestor spirits rather undead or more like divine servants? They are more like divine servants. They are not true. They are not traditional undead. They are very, very weird things. So I would say you could more accurately describe them as functioning. Well, no, not really. I mean, they don't really fit either, because a core aspect of divine servants and undead is that they need magic, right? There has to be a magical source for their existence. For the undead, they need dark magic or necromancy or some sort of sorcery in order for them to exist. And divine spirits are literally etheric entities that emerge from the realm of chaos. And once again, need magic in order to exist, or they will dissipate and go back into the ether. Dwarven ancestor spirits are really fucking weird because they don't need magic. They are entities that have made some sort of oath, or their remains have been desecrated, or something has happened that has resulted in their spirits being like chained to the material plane and not being able to move on to the Hall of the Ancestors. But they just sit there, and they don't need magic in order to sustain themselves. Like they don't need a storm of magic. They don't need a wizard. They don't need runes. They don't need any of that shit, apparently. They're just there. Now, granted, most of the time there's runic stuff involved. So you could argue that the runes might be the source of the magic. But to say it's inconsistent about that particular point is an understatement. But dwarf spirits are incredibly bizarre and very unique. So I don't think it would really be suitable to compare them to anything because there's nothing like them. Prime Dwarf Empire versus Chaos Dwarf Empire. Prime Dwarf Empire would kick the shit out of the Chaos Dwarf Empire. It would not even be a fight. The prime Golden Age dwarfs would absolutely curb stomp the Chaos Dwarfs. It would be the most one-sided massacre because there would be so many fucking dwarfs. Like, the dwarfs would have them so grossly outnumbered, and they would be at the pinnacle of their tech. And not like actual tech, but of their rune tech. So they would have runic guardians stomping around. They would have all of the anvils of doom. They would have like incredible runic lore. The ancestor gods would have been either very recently around or still around. No, it'd be a massacre. You'd probably be dealing with like Snorri Whitebeard as the High King, and Snorri Whitebeard was basically an ancestor god. No, the Chaos Swords would get absolutely eviscerated. That would not be a good fight for them. Marathi, Chaos Dwarf, no, wait, CG. Oh, Chaos Gods. Send Archon to clean up Abaddon's mess when? Well, that would be very funny. That actually might be a really fun, one of the things we've been kind of talking about with Lorebeards, the Wednesday episodes, would be not only having 40k comes to fantasy, but also doing the reverse at some point. So doing a fantasy faction goes to 40k and what happens. And one of the ones that might be very funny is the Chaos Gods Star Trek beaming up Archaon and sending him into 40k to being like, go fucking fix this shit. Like, that could be a really fun episode, would be doing Archaon wins the end times, and then he just wakes up in 40k and the Chaos Gods are like, go fix. go deal with this shit. That might make a really fun episode. Zykaden, hey Sotek, really like the stream where you and Andy did your own take on the Lizardmen end times thingy. Are there plans to do more like it? Yes. Yep. Yeah, the what if episodes. Yes, we will definitely do more what if episodes. In fact, if you haven't seen it, Zykaden, we already have. So for what if episodes, we've done what if Mazdamundi took control of the Great Plan, which was the one you watched. We've also done what if Anarion lived, which follows what could have happened if Anarion had not died at the end of the Cataclysm, and that one also goes all the way to the end times. So check out that one if you haven't. I want to say we've done a third one, but I'm not sure. But we will at some point. Vault Boy, thanks for becoming a YouTube member. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you very much. That is very generous of you. I thank you very deeply for the support. Igion Loman, another reality of Age of Sigmar failing, Games Workshop decided to completely revive Warhammer Fantasy. What percentage or likely number of AOS would you imagine being recycled in fantasy? All of it. Literally all of it. It would have taken different shapes. It would have taken different forms. But I think literally all of it would have been recycled into Warhammer Fantasy. Some things would have been slightly tweaked, but I would say every single one of it. They would have said, oh, the Ideneth Deepkin are actually a race of the High Elves that lived in the parts of Ulthuan that sank to the bottom of the ocean. So the Cataclysm happened, and the Vortex was created, and lots of Ulthuan kind of was destroyed, and then the Sundering happened, and even more of Ulthuan was destroyed. And it turns out that the Ideneth Deepkin are what happened to some of the elves when parts of Ulthuan broke off and sank to the bottom of the ocean. Those elves used sorcery to keep themselves alive, and they prayed to Manon or Mathlon, and Mathlon took pity on them, and he shaped them in his own image, and they became the Nethicin. Like, it wouldn't be that hard. But I think literally all of them would have just been slotted into fantasy if that had happened. Because GW is gonna, they want to make money. Smiling Kira, what's your theory on Yin Yin's missing banner in the Cathay the Old World trailer? I have no fucking idea. Is there a lore reason in Game Workshop yet to complete her dragon head design, thus no banner? So, okay. So what I will say is I think that someone at GW designed a banner and they wanted it to be symmetrical. They wanted this is stupid, but this is what I genuinely think happened. Is they wanted to make a symmetrical banner. They wanted it where it would look really nice across the whole thing and just like split down the middle and looks nice on both sides with equal representation of dragons. And they didn't want it to be 2.5. They wanted it to be 2 and 2. Now, why they would do this is anyone's fucking guess. It could be that their initial thought is that in the early Old World, we might see a lot of talk and representation of Zhao Ming and Miao Ying because they're very relevant to the Old World, where Miao Ying is like standing against chaos and is the matriarch of the Great Bastion, or Grand Matriarch of Nangao, or no, Supreme Matriarch of Nangao. Games Workshop really likes using Supreme. They should use it less because we've got the Supreme Patriarch of the Colleges of Magic, the Supreme Patriarch of the Great Orthodoxy, and the Supreme Matriarch of Nangao. Someone get them a thesaurus. But anyway, but in Zhao Ming is the Lord of Shenyang, which is the trading post to the west. So if you travel the Ivory Road, which is the road that takes you from Grand Cathay to the Old World, you will encounter Zhao Ming. So I very much suspect that the idea might be that they're starting with those two, and then as the setting goes into Grand Cathay, we then will turn our attention to Yuan Bo and Li Dao. But as far as why isn't Yin Yin represented, I will say from a meta level, it is very funny to me that Yin Yin got left out because she kind of is like the big girl failure of the children, the dragon children, if they're doing what they should do with her. And it could be that she's fallen out of her father's favor. If they do, if it's lore relevant, which would be really cool in my opinion, then the idea that they could go with that would work very well should be that Yin Yin has fallen out of favor. That because of her failed invasion of Lustria in the Southlands, which went really bad, and very likely she's had some really bad campaigns against Nippon as well, it could be very well that she has fallen out of her father's favor and maybe she's been exiled. And she basically has been kicked out of Grand Cathay, and is out there doing other shenanigans. So it could be that she has been exiled or is for whatever reason not in Grand Cathay right now, and because of that, she's not being represented on the banner because she's off doing something else. Which would be fine. I would be totally cool with that. Especially because we're about to go into the Age of Darkness and Disharmony, which is when the Celestial Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress vanish. They leave Grand Cathay and are not seen for hundreds of years. And for Cathay, it's like a really bad time. And that would be like a good opportunity for Yin Yin to return. And Yin Yin like comes back and her home is in complete chaos. And she ends up being one of the factions that's helping fight in Grand Cathay. Because we know that the Dragon Children fight each other while the Monkey King rises and becomes a whole problem. So that could be when she returns, is that she shows up and she helps her siblings fight back against the Monkey King. Mom and dad come home and help defeat the Monkey King. And because of Yin Yin's contribution to restoring Grand Cathay, maybe her father brings her back into the fold and forgives her. She redeems herself. That could be a genuinely very compelling and interesting storyline. But it could also be that Games Workshop just forgot. That is possible. It could be that Yin Yin has just been forgotten about, or is just not really relevant to what's going on at the moment. Or maybe GW decided they don't want to use her. I have no idea. I am hoping it's lore relevant and that she will be back later, because I think they could do something really cool with her story if that's what they do. But we'll have to see. Leighton Stainbrook, have you thought of doing a Lawhammer stream where you and Andy create Fishman characters? No, but that could be fun at some point. They would need to be created for a specific purpose, I think, to really warrant it. But as of right now, I don't see us doing something like that unless there was like a particular reason behind it. Soup for sale. Especially, Khorne has plenty of animals corrupted to serve them. Is it ever outlined how creatures that don't make intelligent choices fall to chaos? So, yes and no. So, we know that when creatures, quote unquote, fall to chaos, what it means is that they get overwhelmed with corruption. So, they live in an environment, or they are exposed to an environment that has significant amounts of chaos corruption. Whether it's just the winds of magic are blowing very strongly, or there's a storm of magic, or there's like warpstone, or something happens and they get heavily corrupted by whatever this thing is. Once they become heavily corrupted, at that point, they are fallen. And creatures that have fallen will mutate and kind of go mad and all this other stuff. And from there, they are susceptible to influence. So just like how regular creatures can be influenced by like the lore of beasts, right? The Gur, so the amber wind can influence creatures by like using spells to influence their mood, their behavior, or to just dominate them. The same thing can be done with chaos magic or forms of dark magic to these corrupted creatures. So like the Beastmen have a spell in the lore of the wilds. There's a whole spell in the lore of the wilds that's literally just about dominating monsters. And it allows the Beastmen to like summon to the battlefield Cygors, Gorgons, Chimera, Jabberslights, Cockatrices, Pratons. Like the Bray Shamans are able to dominate these creatures using their magic to bring them to the battlefield. A lot of these creatures will just get kind of caught up in the wake of a chaos invasion. So like when you have a chaos legion attacking and you're like, oh, there's this big monster with it. You may go like, okay, well, how the fuck are they controlling the monster? And the answer often is they aren't. The monster just like follows them because they're causing a lot of death and destruction where they go. And the creature is naturally being drawn to the horde because there's a bunch of corpses it can eat. And all of this violence attracts it. And a lot of its really like ugly, nasty traits are being inflamed by the presence of this horde that causes it to become very aggressive. And it starts basically following alongside the army. Now, sometimes it'll just attack the army and they might capture it, or a wizard might dominate it, or a priest of the dark gods might be able to get a hold over it. But sometimes it's just kind of like, it's almost like a scavenger where it just sort of follows alongside the Chaos Horde, looking for opportunities where it can attack vulnerable people. And when a big fight breaks out, inevitably the creature gets drawn into the conflict because of all the blood being spilled and all the screams and everything literally attract this predator, and it goes into a feeding frenzy and it just starts attacking everybody that it can. So it's messy is the answer, is that it's messy. Lol, could wizards have won the Great War against Chaos? Could they have won it? No, not by themselves. No would probably be my answer. I think an Everchosen is enough of a relevant threat because they have such a titanic horde around them that I don't think any of the order races would be able to beat them one-on-one. Generally speaking, the stories behind the Everchosens are that it requires an alliance. It takes the efforts of multiple races or the direct intervention of like a god to stop an Everchosen. I think in my personal headcanon, I much prefer the idea that alliances are the key to stopping the Everchosens. That the races of the world banding together is the only way to stop an Everchosen. But that's headcanon to me. You have to keep in mind the only Everchosens we really know about are, we know Morcar got bonked by Sigmar. Which you could argue, well, wasn't Sigmar by himself? And I would say no. I would say it is practically guaranteed that the dwarfs were fighting alongside Sigmar against Morcar the Uniter. That Alric the Mad and High King Kurgan Ironbeard were down there punching people left and right. They came down to help with Nagash. I don't see why they wouldn't come down to help with Morcar. And that, if the Lizardmen were to fight an Everchosen, they would need help. They would need the High Elves to come and help them, which would be a likely alliance. Or they would need some other force to join them. Now you could, one second, I have to blow my nose. Excuse me. You could make the argument that like an Everchosen attacking Lustria ends up being more about like awakening the Slawn. Like the Slawn are deep in their slumber and difficult to awaken, and the Lizardmen kind of have to hold out until the Slawn can get involved in the battle, which is kind of how they dealt with Vashnar the Tormentor, where Vashnar the Tormentor invades Lustria and attacks Heshwaddle, and he lays siege to it for like 2 months. And the whole dynamic of Vashnar's invasion is that the Slawn are not involved. The Slawn cannot be awoken. And the ones that do manage to wake up a little later, all they're really able to do is like project a barrier around Heshwaddle to defend it. And it's not until Mazdamundi comes back, because Mazdamundi was basically out on like a retreat, because he was contemplating the sacred plaques. So like Mazdamundi comes back, and when Mazdamundi comes back, he's like, bitch, and he just absolutely annihilates Vashnar's army with the help of Krokgar and some other Lizardmen that show up. The Norse hero, if you're talking about Vashnar the Tormentor, he's somebody else. Oh, wait, I'm not sure who you're referring to, Chancellor Palpatine. I don't know if you're asking about Morcar or Vashnar, but Vashnar the Tormentor was a Slaneshi Chaos champion, who was a pill, to say the least. Let's see here. Mr. Lotenka, for the love of Neferata's for love of Neferati's boobies, bully CA kindly to make a warrior type DLC for the vampire counts. Dude, trust me, I've been barking up that tree. We'll see what happens. Could you ever make allure beards on dragons and giants? Yes, very easily. We've done dragon ogres. I see no reason why we could not do dragons and giants as their own separate episodes. Wordzag, I remember you talked about a planned Aberash book that was canned thanks to the end times. Now that the old world is back, do you think we'll get it? No, because that book was going to be written by Josh Reynolds, and Josh Reynolds no longer works with Games Workshop. Or Black Library. He left Black Library. So no. I don't think they're ever going to finish the Masters of Death series. I could be wrong. And I mean, they could always either, try and book him for it, or they could just hire a different author to try and finish it. But I don't think it's super likely, especially with how little Games Workshop has invested in the old world. As far as novels go, I wouldn't count on it. Niastra, I would love another Wood Elf DLC. What units / heroes / lords do you think would be in it? Hello, Niastra. You are my absolute favorite. But Wood Elves would be hard to do for a full DLC. I'm going to be completely frank with you. I would have a very hard time finding enough units. Characters I can do. For the Wood Elves, we could use Araloth. Araloth could be a legendary lord, who would be like your badass melee hero that is like a normal elf. He's got some fun gimmicks going because he's got like Scarrick the Eye Thief, so he's got a little hawk that he kind of like throws at people and it like rips their eyes out, which is terrifying. But he's like unbreakable and he's a super cool badass guy. You also have Nyeth the Prophetess, who I would also really, really like. Nyeth the Prophetess would be like a caster-focused legendary lord, which, funny enough, the Wood Elves don't actually have one. Like, Durthu can use magic, but it's not what Durthu's good at. You know what I mean? Like, you can run him as a wizard legendary lord, but that's not really what he's designed for. Nyeth the Prophetess is like the most, one of, if not the most powerful wizards in Athel Loren. For legendary heroes, I would really like to get Scarlock the Hunter. Scarlock is Drycha is very similar. Drycha is capable of magic, but it's not really her like forte. Nyeth the Prophetess is like a purely casting focused character. But Scarlock the Hunter would be a really, really, really badass character for a legendary hero. He's a god tier archer. He's an uber archer, which would be really cool for the Wood Elves. He's just a normal Wood Elf that's really fucking good with a bow. In fact, he is the only non-divine, shall we say, backed elf that kills Morgar, which is really impressive. Araloth also managed to kill Morgar, but Araloth did it by literally taking the sap of the Oak of Ages and throwing it on Morgar, which basically caused him to just start like burning. So like Araloth killed him, but he had like a MacGuffin to do it. Scarlock killed Morgar by just shooting him to death, which is super funny. Because like if you go watch the Morgar stream, you'll understand that Morgar is basically invincible against shooting attacks. But there was one particular battle where the elves somehow kind of managed to get through Morgar's defenses. And I think he was shot with like 100 arrows. And Scarlock lands a killing blow by shooting him in the head, which is cool. But he's like a big badass. I'd love to see him. And then as far as like units go, we have all the generic lords for the Wood Elves, right? Yeah, we got Spellsingers, Treemen, Ancient Treemen, and Glade Lords. We got 2 variants of Glade Lords. So yeah, what we could use for Wood Elves would be Shadow Dancers, Shadow Stalkers, whatever they're called. I think it's Shadow Dancer, which are, so when you're looking at the Wood Elf roster, the War Dancers, there is a hero version of them, which is the Shadow Dancer, and they're a really, really powerful War Dancer that has access to shadow magic. So they are shadow wizards that use the lore of Shadow, and they're also very capable melee combatants. So they're kind of like a Loremaster of Hoeth, essentially. So like your Loremaster of Hoeth for the High Elves is a sword master that can also use magic. Your equivalent to that in the Wood Elves is the Shadow Dancer, who is a powerful War Dancer hero that can also use shadow magic. And then units, I have no idea, dude. The Wood Elf roster has everything I could ever want in it as far as like the units go. The only thing I can possibly think of that the Wood Elves do not have in their roster that they used to have in their roster is the Meadow Chariot. But I personally fucking hate the Meadow Chariot. I think Wood Elves having a chariot is really weird. And unnecessary. I'm not a huge fan of it. Because like I don't know, I feel like chariots in the forest is a beastman thing, not a Wood Elf thing. And the Meadow Chariot is from 5th edition Wood Elves, and it got excommunicated very quickly. So I would not want to see its return, but I would love to see some more characters. The one guy, Hobhounds are the Hobgoblin equivalent to Squigs. Yeah, probably something kind of similar. Well, actually, Andy talked a little bit about what Hobhounds are, and if I recall correctly, they're big. Like, they're relatively large. If I recall correctly, they're kind of equivalent to wargs from, like, Lord of the Rings. Unbound, in the Carracks that are taken by greenskins, do they run an actual functioning law and economic system? Yes, though it is incredibly chaotic and messy. It is, it's a greenskin style version of that. Unbound lore, if you go watch the Lorebeards episode on Black Crag, we talk a lot about what a greenskin settlement is like. And Black Crag is not the only one of its kind. You have Red Eye Mountain, Mount Gumbad, Iron Rock, Ekrand. There are quite a few fallen dwarf holds that are owned now by greenskins that are basically like Black Crag, where they are functional greenskin settlements, which are not super often talked about, but they are, important. Cody Smith, do incarnate elementals of Beast exist as independent entities in the realm of chaos prior/after being summoned? Or are they created by the caster? Ooh, that's a really good question, Cody. I would say, so what we know about incarnate elementals and elementals in general, I would say suggest that they are not like demons or divine spirits, where I do not think they are actual independent entities, so to speak. So, I don't think they have their own consciousness that exists within the realm of chaos. And then when someone brings an incarnate elemental into being, which they can also manifest naturally, it doesn't have to be a wizard. Wizards can obviously create them through rituals, but if there is enough of a wind of magic, so in Middenheim, right? In the depths of Middenheim, at the very bottom deeps of Middenheim, where the true flame of Ulrich is, so where the flame of Ulrich actually comes out of, there is an incarnate elemental of beasts down there, because the wind of beasts is tempestuous, because the flame of Ulrich seems to quite literally be a pseudo open gateway to the realm of chaos, where the wind of beast is the only wind that's just spouting out of it, almost like a fire coming off of a really tightly compressed gas chamber, right? Where you imagine you have this big source of fuel, but there's a part of it that breaks open and there's a spark. So all of the energy coming out of that hole is burning, right? But the only thing that flame seems to be producing as a byproduct is the wind of beasts. So instead of it being all 8 of the winds just pouring out like they do from the North and the South Pole, it seems to be only the wind of Gur that's pouring out from Middenheim because of the flame of Ulrich. And we see the same thing with the Shrine of Assurin, where at the Shrine of Assurin, it appears to be the wind of Akshi, the wind of fire, is pouring out of that fire, which is why the phoenixes are born there and hang out there and live there, because the phoenixes are directly tied into the wind of Akshi. Anywho, so that being said, every time we've seen elementals of the various individual winds, they don't seem to work like demons, in the sense where they're not named entities that understand. They don't seem to be truly sentient, would be the way I would probably put it. They seem to be more like expressions of magic that do not seem to have any kind of grander purpose or capability of planning or thinking. They almost seem more like wild animals compared to divine servants or demons, which often have names and identities and purposes. Now, I don't know if Andy would agree with that. Andy very well might not agree with that. I think, Cody, this would be a great question to ask Andy if you get the chance. I would actually just go on the Discord. I would just go on the Lawhammer Discord and go into the Lorebeard section general and just at Andy right now and ask him this question, because I'd be very curious to hear what he thinks. But I would think that they do not exist until they do. Like, I think they just manifest and pop into existence, and that's it. I don't think that they truly exist within like their own realm within the realm of chaos, so to speak. Arturo, ahoy! Do you think it'd be feasible for you to make a lore vid like one lore tidbit about every settlement in Warhammer 3? Jesus Christ, that would take for fucking ever. Do you have any idea how many cities there are? That could be a fun little thing. That might be a good, you know what that might be good for? That might be good for like YouTube shorts, which I need to make more of. I need to either talk to my editor or hire somebody who just makes YouTube shorts for the channel, because that would help a lot with growth, because the growth of the channel really has stagnated in some ways. But I think that would be a great idea. And that could be a fun little series to do for it. Is just pick a settlement and give one random fact and just go down the list. That could be a fun time. Lol. Thank you for the super chat. Prime lizards, elves, dwarves, Nehek versus Cataclysm. Cataclysm wins. And until the vortex is summoned, the Cataclysm always wins. So the demons win. Because they are endless. They are endless. There is no way to permanently put them all down. And the dark gods are only growing in power with every passing day. It is a inevitable victory. Like, you are up against the concept of like fucking entropy itself. You can't beat it. Until the vortex is created. And then you could argue that, so like, if the vortex is a win condition, then obviously we won. But I think if you took like the prime everybody in the Warhammer world against the Cataclysm, you would need everybody to have a chance of beating chaos. And the way you would beat them would be by closing the gates, or at least finding a way to put some kind of barrier or mesh over the gates where it prevented demons from manifesting outside of them, which would be about as fucking difficult as just closing the damn things. But as me and Andy have talked about on like the What If Mazda Mundi episode, closing the gates could potentially be disastrous. It's not a guarantee. It's by no means, in my opinion, it's by no means guaranteed that closing the gates would actually have a devastatingly adverse effect on everyone that lives in the world. But it's likely it would. But there's no way to know for sure unless it was done. Total Warrior, how do the forces of chaos support so many warriors? I thought there were some warriors. There are millions of warriors in the waste. There are. But there's a couple of answers to this. First of all, the chaos wastes are surprisingly diverse. A lot of people think it's just like apocalyptic burning volcano land, and that's not what it actually is. It's a more complex system of insane environments that break the mind and beggar belief, because magic is fucking everywhere. So you can find literally anything and everything because reality itself is breaking down, which means that space is also wibbly wobbly. So there are locations that are bigger than they have any right to be. They're stretched in very unnatural ways. But also a lot of, when you're dealing with actual chaos warriors, right? So not even the tribesmen of chaos, but the actual chaos warriors themselves, the true chaos warriors don't need to eat. They don't need much, actually. They just exist. For a lot of them, their chaos armor is literally fused to their flesh, or it like grew out of their flesh and it's just a part of their body. They can't take it off. So they can't take off their helmet to eat. They don't need to eat. They don't need to drink water. They are sustained purely by the will of the gods at that point. They are beyond mere humanity, and they can live for hundreds and hundreds of years without dying of old age or even aging at all. Chaos is weird, and it violates the laws of reality. Which is very, very helpful for chaos, because it allows them to ignore a lot of the difficulties that come with dealing with such a gigantic army. That being said, that's only for like true Chaos Warriors. There are a lot of normal-ish people that get caught up in Chaos invasions, like the Tribes of Chaos, which are the vast majority of people. And the Tribes of Chaos do need to eat. They do need to sleep. They do need to drink. So how do they survive? Desperately. They secure resources. They engage in cannibalism. They engage in eating horrible, nightmarish, tentacled monstrosities because that's what's available. And it is a harsh environment where it's strongest of the fittest. Now, granted, the gods are sort of looking out for you so long as you continue to please them. So your body will likely mutate in little ways that make it easier for you to survive. So, you know, a very common mutation for Northmen is fang. So they have like wolf teeth instead of human teeth. So like they're better equipped to eat flesh and like tear. They rely, you know, they're able to survive on raw food instead of needing to cook because they don't have fragile little tum-tums like us modern day humans do. But a lot of people die. A lot of people die. But there's also horrible amounts of them because there's so much space and there's so much magic that life thrives. But it's a really unwholesome, grotesque, brutal form of life as opposed to a natural, wholesome part of life, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answers that. Cole Carrion, big fan of Westerns. So what would imagine a cowboy / Texas / Western faction would be like? Where would you put them and what would they be like? Oh, dude, I'd fucking love that so much. So what I would genuinely do, I probably wouldn't have like a cowboy per se, but what I would, I could. Well, here's what I would probably do. If it was up to me, if I was put in charge of the lore at Games Workshop, right? They brought me on and they put me on the lore team and said, all right, Loremaster of Sotek is going to head up a project to develop a new Western faction in Nagaroth. I would be like, cool, I can work with this. And what I would do is I would take all of the space south of the Dark Elves territory, which is most of Nagaroth is south of the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves don't actually control that much territory. The part of the continent they control is relatively small, is mostly around that Great Lakes region. And like a little bit into the mountain range, the Ash Mountains or whatever it is. And I would take all of that big southern space and I would heavily flesh it out because that would be the equivalent in the United States of the Great Plains. The Great Plains, and then heading down up onto the plateau, which is kind of like another part of the Midwest around like the Panhandle of Texas and stuff. And before you descend down into the equivalent of Central America, where you eventually run into Heshwaddle, kind of on the lower side of that. And what I would do personally, because I've thought a lot about this. I've actually thought a lot about this. And what I would do is I would develop the centaurs. I would make the not centaurs, but the true centaurs. Because one of the theories that Andy's kind of talked about, and I also am a big believer in, is that the natural life of the Warhammer world seems to mostly be six-limbed hexapods, where, you know, your dragons, they got 4 limbs, 2 wings, which are also limbs. Dragons, 6 limbs. Dragon ogres, 6 limbs. Centaurs, 6 limbs. Where a lot of the natural creatures of the Warhammer world from the ancient times seem to have 6 limbs. And that seems to be a common theme. And so I would have the centaurs be a natural race that existed in the Warhammer world before the coming of the old ones, but the old ones looked upon them and found them good. The old ones looked upon them and said, these can be part of the great plan. This is a race we can work with. This race pleases us. And the centaurs, I would have the old ones gave them Nagaroth. So what we understand as Nagaroth was always the land of the centaurs, where the centaurs ruled a lot of the equatorial band back when the planet was mostly ice, but the equatorial band was like jungle and stuff. There would have been a temperate zone to the north and south. And I would have said, well, the centaurs were the dominant force in those temperate zones, where they relied upon the fact that they were a very nomadic people to keep ahead of like the big primeval terrors, like the dragons and the dragon ogres and stuff. And they had their own ways of survival. And then when the old ones came to the world and the old ones started messing around with the planet, the environment became better for the centaurs because they already lived in that more temperate climate, that really small temperate zone between the frozen ice sheets and the jungle equatorial band. And that the centaurs were benefited heavily from the change to the world. And that the old ones gave them Nagaroth when they split up the supercontinent. Because for those that don't know, the Warhammer world used to be a Pangea. It used to be a supercontinent. But there was a point where the old ones were like, okay, the great plan, we need the continents to look like this. So they created, I think, the second generation Slann to break up the continents. And the second generation Slann separated the big supercontinent and made all the ones that we know now. And the centaurs would have been given Nagaroth as their goal. Just like the old ones gave the elves Ulthuan, and they gave the mountains to the dwarves, and they gave Grand Cathay to those early humans, as well as parts of the old world to early humans, etc., etc. And also the Southlands. And so what I would do is I would say, okay, the centaurs were given Nagaroth, and they dominated the plains. And like when the demons came, the centaurs held their own against the demons. Once again, because that nomadic nature of theirs gives them a huge advantage of they don't have permanent cities. Or what permanent cities they do have are like well hidden within like the great canyons, like built into the walls of the canyons in certain parts of that North American continent. And like hidden beneath great caverns or hidden deep within forests or up in the mountains and stuff. But they mostly rely on a very nomadic form of life, bouncing between these like sacred sites. And I would do a lot, if I was going to do this, I would lean very, very, very heavily into doing a lot of research on various Native American cultures and taking a lot of deep inspiration from Native American cultures and also forms of life that predate them. Where like we know there used to be horses in North America or the equivalent of North America before they all died out. And then new horses got brought over by the Europeans later. But there was like a common ancestor that was over here along with a bunch of other creatures. So really dealing with a lot of those, I would have a lot of those creatures from like not dinosaur times, but like big mammal times. But not quite the same as good old Mountains of Morn. You know, I'd be leaning more into like horse-like creatures, giant sloths, those kinds of things. Not as much like your saber-toothed tigers or mammoths and stuff. I would leave those over there, over in the old world. But as far as cowboys go, what I would do with cowboys is I would have there be a culture that developed by the colonial humans. That when humans started coming over from the old world and they started establishing the colonies, I would introduce some new colonies that are up in the actual North America part of the world. Because right now, the only colonies we have are down by Lustria, because they're the people that are obsessed with going after all the gold and stuff. But I would have it like, you know, we have Arnheim, which is an elven colony. But I would have some human colonies that managed to get set up more around like modern, the Warhammer equivalent of like Texas or Florida or Georgia or Mississippi. You know, kind of the coastline. I don't know why I said Georgia, but like the coastline states from the US, and those colonial humans adapting to life and dealing with the centaurs, which would be a give and take relationship where sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good. And they have gunpowder. They have guns. And that would allow you to have your cowboys. But I would have it be a very small group of individuals. All right. Anyway, moving on. Michael R. Good day, Loremaster. What can you tell me about the equations at the Lucent Maze? Also, everyone make sure to stay hydrated. Lucent Maze. That is not ringing a doorbell for me. Oh, it's a the Lucent Maze. So that's like a war. Is this a Zinch thing? Yeah, the Crystal Spires. Oh gosh. I'm trying to recall stuff about it, especially by some quick Google food, but it's difficult to look up because it features prominently in the Total War Warhammer prologue, and a lot of people talk about it. The equations at it. I don't know. I would have to actually look that up. But I mean, yeah, you can have elf cowboys as well. I mean, I would be fine having elf individuals from Arnheim who have also learned to adapt with life alongside the centaurs, which is sometimes positive, sometimes negative. Hell, I could even introduce fucking elves using black powder because that's a way to survive out there. You could absolutely play with that, and it would be goofy as hell, but you could do it. Mike, so if I would have to guess, I mean, when you're dealing with like concepts of Zinchian equations, the thing that I often would probably compare it to would be things like the anti-life equation, and that kind of like weird shit from like DC Comics, where you have equations in fantastical settings that are basically explaining the laws of reality. That is probably that's probably the kinds of equations you would be dealing with. Is mathematical theorems that if you could understand them within the Warhammer world would theoretically give you insight and knowledge into impossible things. The 9,999 equations of Zinch, yeah. So I would highly guess that they are the 9,999 equations that explain all laws of magic. Or something to those, because we actually I'm glad you said that, because that just reminded me we do have an aspect of magic that has to do with equations and geometries. So there is an aspect of sorcery. This plays less into spellcraft and more into ritual craft. So rituals are incredibly powerful spells. They're not your normal, like, I'm going to throw a fireball. They're like horrifically, nightmarishly powerful spells that can have dramatic impacts on entire cities, if not entire continents. And rituals require a lot of different things. But one of the things that's very interesting about rituals compared to typical spells is that rituals require geometries and equations, in that you have to build a geometrical design to encapsulate the ritual. And we see this in various different forms of magic. The most famous form of mathematical sorceress equations is known as the corpse geometries. And the corpse geometries are often talked about with Nagash, because Nagash is credited with inventing the corpse geometries, which were used for his grand rituals. So, like the great ritual of Nagash, where he tried to kill everyone in the world. Well, he killed everything in Nehekara, and then the second part of the ritual was to resurrect everything in Nehekara under his control. That would be a good example of a spell that was enhanced using the corpse geometries. So, the 9,999 equations of Zinch, I would say, would be very likely to be mathematical equations that tie into the laws of magic and rituals. And if you could get yourself to understand the 9,999 equations, you would basically understand the core truths of magic. But it's likely that trying to do so would cause your head to explode, and it would also take you an impossible amount of time. So there's that. Lol, what would you add to End or Nagas? The Nagas are being handled very, very well by the Naga fan project, the Koresh fan project, which we featured on an episode of Lorebeards a couple weeks back. If you go watch the episode we did with the Koresh fan project team, they're doing an incredible job, and I'm happy to just leave them to it. For End, the big thing I would want to do with End is I would want to make the 1,000 gods of End. So the land End is known as the land of 1,000 gods. And I would want to make that incredibly core to their identity, where the 1,000 gods of End are said to be far more present than gods in other parts of the world, where it's like every damn road and path and river and everything, like spirits are everywhere in End, and apparently are gods. And I would really want to play around with that with one of two directions. Either A, having it where End is a very intensely divine spirit heavy faction, where all of these different gods have different kinds of creature representatives, which are like demons almost, that the people of End work very hard to keep themselves on positive terms with. And so they fight alongside the people of End. Alternatively, because of what we know about the Tigermen, the Tigermen of End are spoken of a number of times. And the way the Tigermen are spoken of makes them sound like they are some of these 1,000 gods. Where, like, I would guess the boss of the Tigermen, their god, I would be willing to bet is a material being, not an etheric being. And if you went that angle with it, it would be very interesting, because then we would have a culture of humans that functionally worship beastmen. Though they're not like traditional chaos beastmen, they're their own unique dynamic species. But I could imagine a really fascinating place where humanity worships these creatures that are elevated in their opinion, where you have Tigermen and 999 other types of similar creatures. Especially when you're looking at End, you're obviously going to be taking most of your inspiration from India, which have a vastly, incredibly deep, complex, insanely gorgeous and wild and weird set of mythologies and religious myths and stories and creatures. And I would want to take full advantage of that. Like, imagine if they were like, oh yeah, End has 1,000 different kinds of beastmen that the people there worship as divine. And humanity is seen as like the lesser species. So like humans are the bottom of that particular food train, and they worship and care for and placate this caste, this divine pantheon of beastmen like creatures that are inspired by Indian and like Hindu myth, and fight for the people of Cathay. They protect the people of Cathay, or End, sorry, not Cathay. They protect the people of End from chaos, from Cathay, from the Naga of Koresh, where you've got like people that are, you got the Tigermen. You could have people that are like elephant people. You can have like just all sorts of different bizarre creature things that the humans of End work very, very hard to keep them happy. Because if they're not happy, it gets very dangerous very quickly. Which would be, I think, super cool. I think that'd be super cool. Brad Man, the backup plan. That's a cool name. Can you briefly say if any of the 4 gods of chaos have an affinity for the Chaos Dwarves? It seems Nurgle would, but curious about the others as well. No. Is the blunt answer. The Chaos Dwarves have an affinity for Hashut, and Hashut has an affinity for them. But Hashut is a god of greed, and Hashut does not share his toys. He is very selfish and does not like the other great powers. That being said, you could easily argue without any difficulty that there are elements of the Chaos Dwarfs that each of the other four gods appreciate. Khorne would obviously adore their smithing capabilities, their warrior culture, the idea that Chaos Dwarfs spill incredible amounts of gore and blood. That Tzeentch would be deeply impressed by their feats of sorcery, by their domination of demons, their control over magic, their desire to reach for magic and power, despite the fact that it literally will kill them, it will petrify them. But they're so ambitious, they're so conceited that they still go for it. Slaanesh would deeply, I think, appreciate the greed and arrogance of their culture, the extreme access that they take to unleashing weapons of mass destruction, their desire to dominate all other forms of life, their exceptional, excessive cruelty. And Nurgle, I think, would very much appreciate the despair that they inflict on life, that their slaves and these great hundreds of thousands of people that they keep in chains are ripe breeding grounds for disease and decay, where people get sick and they die and they're suffering endlessly, praying to anything that will hear them for some sort of salvation, to which Nurgle is, of course, that force that's also ever willing to offer succor. So there are relationships you could find there, but I would say it's not the norm. And you're digging is the way I would put it. Slushy Raccoon. That's what one might call a suspicious name. Would you rather be the average Beastman or Skaven? Beastman. Not even close. Beastman. Beastman, you're at least living out in like the wilds of the world. And although it's a survival of the fittest, you have the ability to run away, and you know a lot of secrets about the forest. And there is a stronger set of community that tends to... Beastmen are less likely to be treacherous, backstabbing assholes. As funny as that sounds. Beastmen do have a culture and a very strong sense of community, despite everything else about them. Being a Skaven just fucking sucks. Like, your life is pure anxiety awfulness. With the only hope being that you're enough of a backstabbing bitch yourself that you can maybe ascend the ranks, which only puts you in more danger. But, Skaven, you also only live for like probably a couple of years on average. So like maybe it'd be better to be a Skaven because you're going to die really fast and it'll be over. But I think I'd rather be a Beastman. I think they have a slightly better deal. What's your dream End Times Incarnate team? It changes, to be honest. It changes a lot of the time. I think my current one would be something like what would be my current one? I'd probably keep Alariel as the Incarnate of Life. I'd probably have Mazda Mundi be the Incarnate of Light. I would probably have Thorgrim Grudgebearer be the Incarnate of Metal and stay the Incarnate of Metal. I would have Malekith probably stay as the Incarnate of Shadow. I think I would have Grease's Goldtooth become the Incarnate of Beasts as the Great Devourer. I would have, because I'd want every race represented would be the important thing. I'd have to hem and haw about it a bit, but I'd probably be fine with Karl Franz staying as the Incarnate of Azir. And then who am I missing? Death. Nagash. Nagash should stay as the Incarnate of Death. I'm missing one more. Shadow, light, fire. Fire. Who's my fire guy? For fire, fire, I'd have to think about fire for a bit. My knee-jerk reaction for fire would be maybe to consider another human. Oh, you know what? I would probably do a Cathayan. I'd probably do a Cathayan, actually. So I'd probably do like Li Dao. I'd probably do Li Dao as the Incarnate of Fire, because then I would have one person from each major race, essentially. So you could have two elves. Nagash is your undead. Greasus is your ogre. Would I do Greasus or Scrag? I might actually do Scrag as the Incarnate of Beast rather than Greasus, to be honest. But I'd have to think about that. So you'd have the two elves, ogre, dwarf, lizardman with your Slann, dragon with Li Dao. Yeah, that'd be good. Ogres are our main race, in my opinion. Bretonnia representation. So I don't need all the incarnates to be every like race, because that's what God incarnates are for. So like I would have the avatar of Gork and Mork be the equivalent of an incarnate elemental, where Gork or Grimgor ends up being the avatar of Gork and Skarsnik ends up being the avatar of Mork. Gilles Le Breton returns and he is the avatar of the lady, being the Green Knight becomes the king, and he's no longer merely the Green Knight. He's the full avatar of the Lady of the Lake himself or herself. You have, Tehenuin rises up as the full power of the Prophet of Sotek. Thanquol becomes the true representative of the Horned Rat. After some various shenanigans. Archaon is empowered by the four great powers. I could say like maybe Grease's Goldtooth becomes the incarnate of Beast, but Scrag ends up being the physical embodiment of the Maw. I play around with it. But anyway, yeah. Michael R., thank you for the answer. One more question. You said that dying from the Purple Sun spell is a bad way to die. What makes it especially bad? Is that you get glassed. Being killed by a Purple Sun is not simply that you die. It is that you and everything that you are, your soul, is literally blasted into amethyst glass. Like you are a Purple Sun birthing into existence is basically a horrific Cthulhu dark star that being anywhere in its presence just immediately just you into just a statue of amethyst glass that is definitely dead, but it likely kills more than just your body. Because spooky. Fartier, for Araby, there's literally many options. Sand can be used as a main source. Sand shifters, sand shapers, sand vipers. From myths, you can pick up scorpion men and also assassins. The term itself is literally from the term literally says itself, I am from there. Yeah, absolutely. No, full agree. Yeah, full agree. You could have all sorts of crazy stuff. Like scorpion men could be fun, or just like a big scorpion monster. Definitely Arabian assassins. Yeah, sand viper. Yep. Yep. All that stuff. Super cool. Yep. What if Chorfs get human birth rates? Well, there would suddenly be a shitload of them, which would be very spooky, but it would also result it would also result in a very sudden shift, and plus it would still take time for them to be built up. Raving. In the waifu tier list, you said death wizards are unable to have kids, allegedly. Does that include Cathay dragons? Well, so the Cathayan dragon of death is dead. Shyama has been dead for a super long time. Well, dead. I mean, she's dreaming, but is also definitely dead, which is a whole thing. We don't know if Shyama had any descendants. We have no idea. She might not have. There might be no children of the Death Dragon. It's possible, but that being said, it could be that Shyama is powerful enough to have descendants. Despite, because death magic, I would not, in my opinion, I don't know if Andy would agree with this, but in my opinion, I don't think all death wizards would be sterile. I think many of them would be. I think that would be a very common side effect of death magic, would be that you are unable to create new life. But like, I would also counter argue that I think there is 100% definitive proof that death wizards can have children, because Elspeth von Draken comes from a line of powerful necromancers and sorcerer or wizards and stuff. And it seems to be quite heavily implied that many of Elspeth von Draken's ancestors were death wizards. So clearly they can have kids. It might just require some shenanigans. Hammond, make a new school of magic. Go. Who, what, when, where, why, and why races people use it. What are the beginnings of it? Oh, dude, I wouldn't. I don't know if I'd fucking touch that with a 10-foot pole. A new form of magic. Honestly, I personally do not like making extra winds of magic. I know Andy really enjoys the like 20 plus winds of magic. I deeply prefer there only being 8. And then every other form of magic is basically combining different forms of magic, like balancing the percentages of taking other aspects of the various lores to create something new, or it comes from a divine source. That being said, if I was going to be making a new lore of magic, the one that I would immediately lean into I mean, you could argue that, well, okay, if I was going to make a genuine new lore of magic from scratch, I would make the Fishman lore of magic. I would want to make a true lore of the abyss that is all about tsunamis and whirlpools and like controlling the ocean and the things in the ocean and the crushing darkness of the depths of the sea and the horrible cold and the lack of light and all that stuff, and have it be central to the Fishmen and be a lore that is horrific, like deeply, deeply horrific. That would be my big thing, is that the Fishmen are the true unrivaled masters of it, but there would be ways for other races to learn about it and attempt to wield it themselves, but it would probably come with deep, horrible consequences to try and wield it. But yeah. And then last one, because we are way over time, but I figured we could go a little longer because we're having fun. 10,000 if you want to write an end times character ending, what would you do with Gorfang, Rockgut, Kolek, Suneater, Tretch, Craventail, and Lunamim? Thanks for answering. So Gorfang Rockgut has a canonical end, and it's great, and I wouldn't change it. Where Gorfang Rockgut, after the whole thing with Queek Headtaker attacking Karak Azul ends up attacking Black Crag, and there's this big epic battle, and because Black Crag is being laid siege to, Gorfang is in a bad situation. So Gorfang essentially kind of sneaks out, and he leads a big old army to Carrick 8 Peaks because he wants to take Carrick 8 Peaks for himself. And he goes to kill Belagar, and he ends up fighting Thorgrim, and Belagar duels Gorfang, and Belagar frankly loses, but Gorfang gets taken out of the fight by somebody else, fortunately shooting him in the chest with a bolt thrower. But then Gorfang duels Thorgrim Grudgebearer, and it's fucking epic. It's one of my favorite stories. It's from the novella called Thorgrim. But the duel between Thorgrim Grudgebearer and Gorfang Rockgut is peak. Like, it is so well written, and it's so good. And is absolutely fantastic. And so I wouldn't change that. I would keep Gorfang's story the exact same. I think his story was great. Kolek Suneater, I would have Kolek Suneater go to wake up his dad. I think that would be my story focus for him. I think Kolek would go fulfill the prophecy to awaken Krakenrock the Black for the end times. And he succeeds. And then he goes down and he fights alongside Archaon's invasion. And I would have there be a big fuck you boss fight of him versus somebody. You could do him versus Cetra, sure, whatever. But I would have Kolek Suneater be one of the big bads that Chaos has on their side. In fact, you know what? I actually probably would kill Kolek a little earlier. Well, I would have to think about it. A part of me would really want to kill Kolek either at Prague or Kislev City itself. I think there would be something kind of fascinating about like Kolek attacking. I think there would be something really cool about a story of Kolek arriving at the siege of Prague and Kolek attempts to repeat what he did at the original siege, where he gets up to the wall and he hits it with his hammer and shatters the wall, which lets a lot of the Chaos forces in. But to show that like this is the apocalypse and things are more crazy than they were, Prague has a way to deal with it. Like that, I think that would be particularly exciting, is if Prague had learned from their history and they had a way to counter Kolek and they did it and they kill him. I think that would be actually really interesting and fascinating and a cool story, because the horror would then be that as Kolek goes down, like Kolek is killed and Prague, like the defenders of Prague are like, oh my God, we killed him. And then Krakenrock shows up. And like just seeing the absolute despair, like watching that plummet of like the absolute hope of holy shit, we killed a god, to that just falling to the absolute pit when you see something that makes him look small. Like when there is a actual titanic mountain of flesh and armor that is his father that shows up. And he just obliterates the walls of Prague in revenge. I think that would be a really cool way to handle that. Once again, showcasing that this is the end of days. Where even Kolek Suneater was relatively minor compared to what is to come. I think there would be a story there that would be quite fun. What would I do with Tretch Craventail? Tretch Craventail, I would probably have die relatively early. Well, no, I would, if I was going to play into what Tretch does, I would probably do a story where it looks like Tretch dies during one of the early conflicts of the first Skaven attack. So like the Skaven launched their first big assault where they attacked the old world, and Crookback Mountain's involved in that attack. And I would probably have Crookback Mountain mostly attacks the Chaos Dwarfs, and it goes really badly for them. Like it goes really badly. Like they do manage to hurt the Chaos Dwarfs. You know, maybe they manage to destroy the Tower of Gorgoth. I think that could be fun. So like the Tower of Gorgoth is taken, but they get like absolutely torn to pieces when they try to attack the Black Fortress in Zarnagrund. And I would have it where Tretch is believed to die. Like it looks like he dies, but then he comes back. And I would probably make fun of that. I'd probably do it like 2 or 3 times. Where you would keep having circumstances where it looks like Tretch dies, but then he pops back up later because he's lucky. And then once again, to showcase that it is the apocalypse, then you have him actually die. But I would probably make his death pseudo-ironic. You know what I would probably do is I would turn his luck against him. I would probably have it where Tretch ends up in a situation where he's close to Thanquol, because Thanquol also has a a canonical luck manipulation ability. And what I would have is there's a moment where some great hero is about to kill Thanquol. Like they're about to land the killing blow on Thanquol with some kind of spell or attack or whatever. And because of Tretch's luck, his luck ends up being lucky for the Skaven as a whole, as opposed to lucky for just him. And he ends up accidentally blocking the shot. I think would be the funniest way to kill him. And a very suitable way to kill him would be that I would probably have it where Tretch tries to assassinate Thanquol, but he gets lucky, and in his luck, he ends up being killed by something else that was going to kill Thanquol. That's probably what I would do, because it would be a very suitable way for him to go down. And then for Muna Mim, tying Muna Mim into the end times would be fun. Unfortunately, I think her story would be relatively short in the grand scheme. I think Muna Mim would be one of the early threats of the end times, where like there's a big invasion by the Skaven, and in the meantime, Muna Mim like unleashes her great ritual to try and turn the Reichland into a big marshland. And I would probably have it where she's partially successful, which creates difficulties not only for the people of the Empire, but also creates difficulties for the like forces of chaos and stuff that are trying to attack, though it ends up working well in Nurgle's favor, which would build up well to the fall of Altdorf storyline. But I would probably have Muna Mim as partially successful unleashing this ritual, but I would have her end up dying against something. I don't know what exactly I would use to kill her. A part of me thinks it would probably be I might do Vlad to kill her. Vlad or Manfred. That could be kind of interesting, where Muna Mim threatens the Empire, but because Nagash is away, Nagash kind of like put the vampires in charge of, like put Vlad in charge of defending the Empire. That rather unexpectedly Vlad von Karstein is what ends up coming after her. Especially because Vlad would be able to relate to her in some interesting ways, because Muna Mim's entire concept is that she's incredibly lonely. And very bitter and sad. And I think Vlad, especially if Isabella was lost to him, would deeply understand her, which would make them, I think would make their interaction very interesting. But I would have her ultimately die at the end of that little story. But it would be like relatively minor. All right. Man, I don't know why. When I do these streams where in the mornings I just talk the whole time, I don't know why the amount of like mucus I get is insane. And it only happens when I do these kinds of streams where it's just me talking. I don't know what it is about talking that makes my sinuses be like, produce more. Crazy. All right, last one, then we really got to go. Hound of Moments. What additional dialogue scene, Total War Warhammer 4 mechanics, like Siege Battle rework. Total War Warhammer 4, if they ever did it. I would like cleaning up sieges, which it sounds like they're going to do this summer. But the big thing for me would be, you know what I would want for Total War Warhammer 4 as the main feature would be expanding the map. Would be making Nagaroth, Lustria, and the Southlands into Koresh as big as they're supposed to be. So making the world appropriately sized compared to how big the old world is. That would be my main thrust for Total War Warhammer 4 if we got it. All right, that's it for me. I hope you all had fun, because I really do have to go now. But thank you all very, very, very much for taking the time to hang out with me. I deeply appreciate it. I do apologize again that we didn't have regular Lorebeards with Gorbad, as unfortunately Andy had some other stuff he had to take care of. But you know, do be sure to keep him and his family in your well wishes, and hopefully things are going okay for them. And we will be back this Wednesday, hopefully, to do the Warhammer Afterlives, which I think this is the third attempt to do that stream. I promise this isn't what it's normally like. I promise Lorebeards is not normally us having to back stuff up constantly, but there is some there's stuff going on. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate your patience. Because there's life's just lifing all over the place. I will say this. I don't want to say what it is yet because I want Andy to be here with me when I say it. So hopefully it'll be this Wednesday. But what I will say is that for Lorebeards, we are going to have a super exciting announcement for all of you very soon. Very soon. Like super soon. Hopefully we can announce it this Wednesday. So the next time me and Andy are both on screen together, I have a very important thing to tell you about. But I won't do it until then. So don't ask. So please look forward to that. And with that, thank you for watching. It is extremely likely, practically guaranteed, that I will be online streaming later this evening. But I will probably be playing Final Fantasy 14, so you may not care. But if you do, feel free to come by. We still chat about Warhammer lore and stuff, even when we're playing other games. So if you're like, I want to ask more lore questions, feel free to come by, especially for Final Fantasy streams. They tend to be really chill. So if you want to ask questions, it's a perfect time to do that. But in any event, I got to go, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.